the Western fantasy journey that began with Game of Thrones. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 201 Sublimation. The black side parted short hair covered part of his forehead, but he looked very fresh. His handsome features were swaying due to the flowing water, making them a little hazy, but this did not prevent his ice blue eyes from leaving a beautiful reflection on the surface of the stream. These eyes were deeper and more charming than before, but when they were staring at him, he was ignored. At this time, Renly was observing his attribute panel through the surface of the stream in the forest. Racial level, LV4. Occupation, Bard, Elite, Night King. Entry level, occupational features, musical sensitivity, natural instruments, sound of sensibility, leader's will. Knowledge, heraldry LV7, swimming LV7, etiquette LV7, lore and anecdotes LV7, riding LV7, archery LV6, dagger mastery LV6, swordmanship LV6, lance LV5, shield mastery LV5, poison making LV5, languages LV5, spear mastery LV3, useless skills ignored. Derived features, secret emblem, Valyrian bloodline, mutation, curse of embers, warrior sun, moment of spiritual communication, naga fire, high majesty, sublimation. 31%. His physical growth over a long period of time has quietly raised his racial level by 1 level. The corresponding changes, that his physical fitness is better than that of an ordinary adult, and his recovery from injuries is far superior to that of ordinary people. In addition, his mutated Valyrian bloodline has added the ability to be immune to all diseases. Over the years, he has trained the bard profession to the 3rd level, and thus evolved 2 professional characteristics, natural instruments and sensual voices. They are both wonderful, but to put it simply, one allows Renly to use anything that is handy as an instrument accompaniment, and the other allows him to sing more movingly. Compared to the bard, the Night King profession has basically stagnated. Just as he once worried, the way to improve this profession is no longer the same as that of the knight. In terms of knowledge, his etiquette ability has been improved to LV7, so a characteristic called high dignity has been derived. It sounds a bit mysterious, but in fact it is just that his temperament is more majestic at ordinary times, and it is more scary when he gets angry. The legends and anecdotes attribute driven by learning history has also been raised to the 7th level over the years, but no new attributes have been derived. Instead, an original psychic emblem attribute has been further improved. Secret emblem. You can achieve a certain degree of psychic communication by observing the target emblem, or you can touch the emblem to let the emblem tell you a secret hidden in the target's heart. This ability is very interesting, and this improvement has made Renly understand another way to improve his own characteristics. That is, if the characteristics derived from knowledge are of similar categories, they may be directly integrated with the original ones at birth. Examples are not limited to the combination of psychic emblems and legends and anecdotes, but also the characteristics that evolved after riding reached the 7th level and combined with his previous psychic language attribute, which is also the reason why Renly can ask the eagle to catch a live rabbit for him. Psychic moment. You can receive and release emotions, or you can actively use this ability by touching to connect with the target's mind. In addition to these, the most obvious change is the last item in the attribute column, the so-called sublimation. This thing suddenly appeared after he took a nap 2 years ago. The initial progress was only 25%, and now it has become 31%. However, Renly did not take the initiative to do anything, and it improved by itself. What is this thing? How did it appear? How does it grow? What will happen when the progress is full? Many questions have emerged. Renly guessed that this thing might be related to the changes in the current world, but he never figured out what it is, so he could only suppress it in his heart. The direction behind him was noisy at this time. The cooks were busy chopping the prey with kitchen knives, and the servants were busy collecting firewood and helping. The afternoon sun was shining and covering the green grass camp, which made the people participating in the hunting activities happy. The stream in front of him was located not far from the hunting camp, near the edge of the forest. The stream made a gurgling sound when it flowed. Occasionally, small fish could be seen jumping out of the dark gaps between the pebbles under the clear water and swimming away quickly. After washing his face here, Renly stood up and left the river, returning to the hunting camp behind him. At this time, the two brothers of the Tyrell family were pointing at a roasted whole deer that was being roasted on the grill by the chef in front of them with several collateral descendants of their family. I always think that the hounds trained by Willis are the smartest in the Seven Kingdoms. A brown-haired strong boy who was 1 year older than Renly and had a circle of green and fluffy beard on his chin, said intentionally or unintentionally, after seeing someone approaching, "You don't know, this deer has the same temperament as one of its relatives, that is, it is cunning and runs fast. If it were an ordinary hound, it would have escaped long ago." This remark caused a burst of laughter, and Renly rolled his eyes when he approached. It's rare to see Fatty Garland also beating around the bush to insult others. "Please call me the brave Garland, Renly." Garland, who had already left the ranks of the little fat boys, answered proudly with his chest puffed out, "Because the fact proves that I'm not a fat man." "Then do you want to call me Uncle Renly? Look at how proud you are." The young man snorted, turned his head away to avoid the main point, and asked his cousins a question to change the subject. "What do you think I should bring as a gift when I visit the Fossoway family later?" "I suggest a piece of jewelry." "Jewelry? It would be better to make a wreath." "Are you kidding? Miss Leone is not a farm girl. Why would you send a wreath? You don't understand this. If it's a formal occasion, you must give a presentable gift, but in private, it doesn't have to be too precious, because they don't need it. You have to show your heart." 17 years old is not considered young in the Seven Kingdoms. The former fat boy Garland now has a fiancée and is about to get married. This makes Renly sigh at the precocity of young people in this world, but when you think about the fact that many noble children even get married at the age of 12 or 13, 17 does not seem too early. Thinking of this, he looked at the heir to Highgarden, who was in his 20s, but still had no marriage contract, and could not help shaking his head. The second son of a noble family is more relaxed in marriage, but the marriage of the heir of the family is very strict. For example, the one in front of him has not been engaged until now, because there is no suitable candidate, and he has become an old man. Sometimes I really envy you, Renly. Perhaps he was thinking of the same thing as him. The brown-haired young man with a beard sighed while his younger brothers were discussing heatedly. "You have a good brother." "My brother is indeed good." Renly laughed when he heard it. The so-called good brother naturally refers to King Robert, but the goodness in the other party's mouth is not because of the king's identity, but because he never interfered with Renly's marriage. Although in a sense, Robert is a Baratheon family in King's Landing, and Renly is a Baratheon family in Dragonstone. The two families have separated after Renly came of age at the age of 16, but according to custom, the elder brother has the right to arrange a marriage for his younger brother. However, Renly thought that it was normal for his cheap elder brother to be too busy with prostitution in King's Landing and not have time to pay attention to him. After chatting casually and having a barbecue party in the forest, the young people continued to hunt in the forest in the afternoon and set up camp here at night. It was not until dusk the next day that they announced the end of the hunting activity, and a team of more than 60 people set off to return to Highgarden. In fact, the nobles did not need so many people to hunt, but each hunting represented a territory inspection, proving the nobles' ownership of the land and forests, and also invisibly increased the deterrence of the lords to their people. So the lords did not hunt simply for fun, and of course not because of lack of food, or in other words, there were those poor nobles who would use hunting to supplement their family income, but generally speaking, the nobles who reached a certain level would not be so shabby. Most lords never lacked food, so they would distribute the prey they hunted when passing through some villages. Basically, they will be stigmatized, so they will be grateful to many people, and the discussion about this will inevitably circulate in the corresponding village for a long time. Who has received a gift from which young master of the lord's family? The lord's family is really a good person, etc. However, correspondingly, civilians are prohibited from hunting in the forest. Those who violate the rules will have their hands chopped off, or be sent to the wall as labor reform prisoners. Even raising chickens in the forest requires the consent of the Lord and then paying a tax. So many times Renly is very fortunate that his reincarnation skills are relatively good, and he was not unlucky enough to be reincarnated as a civilian, which would be too fucked. The hunting ground is a bit far from Highgarden. The team did not reach the destination that night, but stayed in a passing manor. The knight who managed the manor belonged to the Tyrrell family. He was frightened by the arrival of the young masters of the feudal lord's family. He summoned the farmers inside and outside the manor to do a good job, and even sent a few maids to warm the bed. Others didn't know how to respond, but Renly had no interest in this kind of maid who had entertained countless people. He waved her away and prepared to go to bed. But in the end, he didn't get rest, because a woman broke in through the window under the cover of night. The queen does keep a witch in the palace, my lord. The person who came in was agile and slender. After taking off the black hood on her head, she revealed long golden hair and a mature and beautiful face. Although the way she broke in was quite special, her expression when facing the black-haired boy was very respectful. It is said that her name is Melisandre. There is still one chapter today, and I will read it in the evening as usual. In addition, I counted the chapters I owe now. I calculated that I owed 21 chapters a while ago, and then I paid back a few chapters during this period, which became 18 chapters. However, if you count the increase in recommendation tickets and monthly tickets during this period, I still owe 20 chapters. I counted the recommendation tickets as an integer, which has not arrived yet, but it will arrive soon, so I will count it first. Chapter 200 Into the Moving Box. Compared to the young and capable female bandit 9 years ago, the white deer wender in front of him looked like an elegant lady, with neatly combed blonde hair, restrained manners, and a much calmer temperament. That Melisandre is said to be a red-robed woman who believes in the Lord of Light, my lord, but she is very mysterious, and we cannot see her in person. Wearing a thin linen shirt, Renly, who was sitting at the head of the bed, was gathering up the long sleeves covering his wrists. After hearing this, he asked casually, is she also looking for a door? Yes, Queen Cersei has been using her people to help the red-robed woman search in King's Landing. Have you found anything? Renly asked again. In recent years, a group of people called the Old Disciples by the Lords have appeared on the continent of Westeros. This group of people always preach that the door to the old world has been opened and the world will be destroyed, so the door must be found and destroyed. The remarks are very unfashionable and not well received. However, this group of people still have real skills. At least, they are very knowledgeable about mysticism. In other words, the so-called Old Disciples are the priests of the various sects of gods outside the Westeros continent, including the Red God sect, that believes in the Lord of Light, which is also the sect behind the red-robed woman who killed Renly in the original plot. Maybe not, the blonde woman replied, but the queen blocked several areas, including a well in Flea Bottom, a store on Steel Street, and the throne room was closed for an afternoon. This made Renly frown, and then asked seriously, did my brother agree to do that? The black-haired boy's stern face had an invisible deterrent power, which made the respectful woman lower her head after hearing this, but this did not affect her words. It is said that it was blocked when His Majesty went to Silk Street. Silk Street is a brothel street in King's Landing, with a lot of high-end, medium-end and low-end brothels in it. It is the most popular entertainment venue in King's Landing. Renly's expression relaxed when he heard that, and he half-jokingly said, he keeps doing that. Even if he doesn't die from drinking, he will get sick and die someday. Wender couldn't respond to this, and Renly didn't say anything else. Instead, after putting on his boots, he stood up and walked to the simple wine cabinet in the room, took out a wine glass and a wine pot, poured 2 glasses of wine, handed one of them to the other party, and took a sip of the bitter crimson liquid, and fell into deep thought. The old world, it was impossible for him not to guess what it was. The gates to the old world, mentioned by the foreign gods and priests, must be the chaotic mark on his left wrist, and the information behind the group of people who could act together regardless of their sects and beliefs was also very obvious. Just looking for someone can make Renly feel a sense of crisis. Looking for a door. How are you? He asked to change the subject. I feel fine, but sometimes at night I feel itchy. The woman answered with a confused expression. Frequently? Basically once every 2 days. Renly hummed and said nothing. Compared with his own knowledge improvement over the years, the things on his left wrist have not changed much. He is currently considering a deal with the 7 gods, but he is not sure whether to do it. The Naga fire is still the same, but it has recovered from its weak state. The only change is the ancient road seed. Over a long period of time, he has accumulated hundreds of seeds, and this also made him discover a special thing. That is, as time passes, the originally grey fire will gradually become colorless and transparent, and this transparent fire does not have any tau in it. He once conducted an experiment on a death row prisoner for this, and the conclusion he came to was very interesting. Blank seeds can become any imaginable or unimaginable power seeds, or in other words, blank seeds will derive different changes depending on the target of the attachment. This is obviously a good thing, because Renly cannot use the ancient road seed derived from his wrist at all. After all, that thing can affect thinking, and it will only create unruly bandits and robbers, and he does not think that such people have much value. Come back to Highgarden with me tomorrow morning, observe from close range, and spend more time with your son. After thinking for a while, Renly said, "It's enough to have someone watching King's Landing. How is Tob?" The other party couldn't help asking. It was strange to say that she, a former female bandit and now the head of intelligence, didn't feel any restraint when she was outside, even when facing the king. But she always felt that the master in front of her was very intimidating, so much so that she didn't dare to speak casually when facing him. But she couldn't help but feel that she couldn't hold back when facing the news about her son. "Of course it's better to ask me to tell you." Renly laughed and said, "Whether it's fine or not, you will know it when you go back." The woman knew that her son was fine after seeing his expression, so she felt comforted. Then she stayed here to tell him some other unimportant news, and then she said goodbye and left through the window. Renly bowed his head and thought again. In addition to looking for the door, the group of priests and disciples also actively hunted down the ancients who came over, perhaps because they thought that the ancients knew the relevant clues, or there might be other influences. But in general, these have no effect on him at present. But he needs to prepare for this. After all, those people want to destroy him. Thinking of some shady ideas in his mind, Renly initially finalized an action plan that night, but he couldn't rush this matter, mainly because he was far away in the River Reach, and the planned target for implementation was in King's Landing, which was really out of reach. He planned to wait until the White Deer Winter's vacation was over, or simply wait until he left the River Reach in a while and officially returned to Dragonstone to take over before starting to implement it. That's right, he will leave Highgarden and go to the territory of Dragonstone in a while. In Westeros, 16 years old means adulthood, and his life as an adopted son of the Tyrell family has basically come to an end. He hasn't left yet, but he is just waiting to participate in the naming day banquet of his cheap adoptive mother who will be 66 years old soon. After staying overnight in the manor, the hunting team set out again early the next morning, heading towards Highgarden, and finally arrived that afternoon. The White Castle standing majestically at the end of the broad river bank is no different from what it first appeared, but once you walk in, you can find that the people here are no longer the same as before. The elegant silver-haired Duchess has a few wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, which are not obvious, but silently reveal that she is no longer young. Renly's cheap adoptive mother was troubled by toothache a few years ago, but now she doesn't have this trouble, because her teeth have all fallen out. The tall and mighty Duke of Mace is not in the castle, but in King's Landing as the Chancellor of Finance. In contrast, the gay man in his memory, the little brat who used to walk with difficulty, has now become a pretty boy who follows Renly around and asks him questions at the dinner after the hunt. The wrinkled baby who was held in the arms of the nanny to feed has now grown into a beautiful little girl with a dignified and elegant temperament. She is whispering with a few girls of the same age in the corner, and she laughs from time to time. Girls are stupid, Marguerite is the same. The pretty boy with smooth brown short hair beside him muttered to Renly, "You always smile foolishly and say childish things. It couldn't be more annoying." Renly shrugged his shoulders after hearing this, and Willis on the other side looked at his younger brother curiously after hearing this. "What childish things did she say?" "She asked me under what circumstances a box would move by itself." The boy said disdainfully. I said how could a box move? Boxes are made of wood. Wood can't move at all. And she said there must be a box that moves, because she saw it. I asked her where she saw it. She stammered and couldn't tell me. She must want me to find boxes all over the castle to trick me. I won't fall for her trick. Hearing this, Willis nodded in agreement with a serious face, and then whispered with his brother, while Renly beside him squinted unconsciously, and glanced suspiciously at the girls in the corner of the hall, and happened to see one of them secretly looking at this side, and their eyes met and separated, and then the other party turned back quickly as if guilty, pretending to listen to the words of her friend seriously. After thinking for a while, Renly said something to Willis beside him, and then walked towards the corner with a serious face. There happened to be a moving box in his room. It was an item that Renly accidentally forgot to pick up the seed one year, and was touched and mutated. It was also the trash box where he used to hide things, but that was not the point. The point was that there were a bunch of scary things in the box, that even he was afraid of, the toys from his childhood, toys that must not be taken out of the box. There are still 19 chapters to go. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 203 Marguerite. If a thief is guilty, it is impossible not to notice the danger approaching, but the little girl who was sitting at a long table in a hidden corner of the hall with her female companions seemed to have noticed nothing. She turned her back to him and continued to whisper to her companions. Green. Green looks more vivid. I don't think purple is good. It's a bit too old. Look, she didn't find it, but the three beautifully dressed female companions beside her couldn't blindfold them. So when they saw the black-haired boy approaching, one of them quickly poked her companion and stood up to salute. Lord Renly. The other two also stood up and saluted, their actions full of ladylike atmosphere. As a last resort, a guilty 10-year-old girl turned around and lifted her skirt to salute. Good evening, Lord Renly. Her voice was pleasant, but also a little reluctant. After glancing at the beautiful girl with smooth brown hair and lowered eyes, Renly didn't say anything, but looked at the other three girls. What are you talking about? We are talking about the color of clothes. I like a purple dress, but Marguerite said purple is not good. One of the girls who looked very smart answered, and the other two nodded. You can only know whether it looks good after you try it on, so go ahead and try it on, Arrow, and then ask everyone. Renly made his suggestion. Although he had something to ask, he couldn't speak directly right away. I thought so too, but I'm afraid of being laughed at. The girl named Darrow answered melancholy. No one will laugh at you, Ello. A fat companion beside her whispered, and you can wear it for us in private. Lord Renly, are you free recently? I want to ask you for the harp playing skills. The last girl among the three ignored the topic of her companions, but asked shyly, I have practiced for a long time, but I always feel that it is not as good as when you play. You can come to me after breakfast tomorrow, Alan. Renly replied with a smile, then glanced at a girl who should have been active, but had not spoken, clapped his hands and said, okay ladies, I have something to do with Marguerite, can you give us a private space to talk? The three girls nodded without hesitation after hearing this. Of course, Lord Renly. You can talk as long as you want. Have a good dinner. Renly likes to get along with children very much, because they have not yet been exposed to the dark side of the world. Their hearts are pure, beautiful and even interesting, and through their own characteristics of perceiving emotions, this beauty can be clearly felt by Renly, which makes him even happier. In contrast, in recent years, he is not willing to interact with adults, because no matter what their surface attitude is, they always have some dark emotions in their hearts, which is simply disgusting. Of course, he didn't like to interact with them before. After the girls walked away tactfully, Renly looked at the only little girl present. At this time, she had changed from the shy look of lowering her head just now to looking up at Renly quietly. She seemed to have adjusted her mentality and seemed to be wondering why Renly wanted to find her alone. Why, you are full again and don't want to talk, Renly said while motioning to sit down and talk. After years of contact, he and this girl are not strangers. He also notes that this little girl looks simple, but in fact she is very cunning at a young age. Sister Nastrika said that a lady never lets her stomach eat too much. The other party sat opposite Renly cheerfully, wearing a fitted and elegant light yellow dress, with a little baby fat on her face, and a calm expression, but her pair of crystal clear and watery innocent big eyes like a little deer kept blinking, and the frequency seemed a little fast. What do you want to talk to me about, Renly? Tell me now, I'm busy. What you're busy with is discussing the color of clothes with the kids. Renly laughed at the words, then frowned and went straight to the point. You entered my room again. He looked scary or intimidating when he frowned, which made the girl sitting there panic and subconsciously avoided his gaze. But then she turned her gaze back. As a lady, how can you just run into someone else's room? That's too rude. She stared back at Renly, pretending to be unhappy and said, you are so old. Don't listen to some idiot's random slander and believe such unreasonable lies. A moving box? Renly reminded her. A moving box? The other party's eyes widened when he heard it. What is that? Do you have it in your room? If it were a normal person, she would probably be deceived by her or fight back, but Renly could only disdain it. He could feel the other person's emotions. You always like to blink when you lie, he said, and saw that the corners of the other person's eyes unconsciously curved, as if he was a little proud, and then he said again with a blow, so in order to correct this problem, you always like to open your eyes very wide when you lie recently. It's not normal at all, like two small balls. What small balls? The girl pursed her lips and said dissatisfiedly, is it gemstones or crystals? Do you know how to compliment people? I remember mother taught you how to cross girls. The etiquette of the nobility does have teachings on how to get along with ladies and please them, but Renly knew it, but he never took those things seriously. Don't try to change the subject. What did you do in my room? He questioned, and his serious face made the atmosphere here solemn all of a sudden, and also made the little girl who originally held her head high and chest out couldn't help but shrink her neck. The original idea of quibbling unconsciously turned into carefully telling the truth. No, I didn't do anything. I just wanted to help you clean your room. Why did the box in your room move? I have a cat in the box, so it moves. Why didn't I see it? You opened it? Renly's eyelids jumped when he heard that. As a lady, how could I? The girl argued in a low voice, but under the other party's serious gaze, she still told the truth unwillingly. Okay Renly, I was curious, so I opened it and took a look. Just a glance. Definitely not more. What did you see? A pile of toys, the girl said, as if she suddenly found a way to fight back. The cautious look on her face disappeared, and she raised her head instead, with a slight look of contempt in her eyes. You are so childish, Renly. You are so old and still playing with children's toys. You didn't move it? Renly asked worriedly, ignoring the provocateurs' way of changing the subject. I don't like boys' toys. The girl pouted and replied, those wooden swords and armors are so ugly, so I closed them after taking a look, but I didn't see any cats, so why did the box move? Some cats can't be seen. Renly replied, feeling that the other party was indeed not lying, and he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. What cat? I'm too lazy to tell you. Renly stood up after getting the answer he wanted and was about to go to the room to check it out one last time to avoid missing anything. As a result, as soon as he turned around, his sleeve was grabbed from behind. Renly, as a knight anointed with holy oil, you should be patient with ladies. The girl's slightly resentful voice came from behind. There should be a farewell etiquette. Why don't you have any manners? Then should you call me Uncle Renly? Renly looked down at the other party and asked back, Uncle Renly. The girl raised her head and smiled at him, and her neat little white teeth looked fine and delicate under the light of the banquet. Renly was helpless when he heard this. People will change. He confirmed this again. At first, the little girl was very polite to him. Whenever they met, she treated him as an elder. As a result, the older she got, the more unruly she became. It was fine if she didn't call him uncle. After all, people in this world were used to calling each other by their names. But her attitude was no longer as honest as before. She even started to lie, avoid important issues, act, and change the subject. Who did she learn this from? She was really bad. He lamented that the pure soul of the little girl in front of him was becoming more and more tainted. On the surface, Renly bowed slightly to her in accordance with etiquette under the threatening gaze of the other party. Good night, beautiful little lady of Highgarden. See you tomorrow. Good night, Sir Renly. The other party nodded implicitly, lifted her skirt to return the greeting, and then turned around and happily went to find her group of friends, probably feeling that she had finally won. This little girl. Renly shook his head, then looked at the still lively dinner, ignored it, and walked out of the hall, going up the tower, and back to the room. This process took less than 5 minutes, because of Renly's fast pace. After closing the door, he squatted down, and dragged out a seemingly ordinary oak box from under the bed and opened it. Looking around, a pair of black and white blood-stained eyes were piled up at the top of the inner space of the box. The change in light caused its pupils to shrink slightly, and then it stared closely at the black-haired boy in front of it. Thank you for the 500 reward from the book friend. Good books are never enough, and the book friend 201907171550380002. Thank you for the 200 reward from the book friend Zyatang 246, and thank you for the 100 reward from the book friend 20181110960659-67. Chapter 204, God Box, Murals, Brocades, Carpets, Round Mirrors, Bed Curtains. The clean and white room was clean and exquisite, but in the oak box beside the bed, there was a pool of flesh and blood with a rotten smell, and the accumulated black blood. Everything in front of him was enough to scare anyone's scalp. Although Renly had seen it dozens of times, he still felt uncomfortable, so he closed the box without hesitation, and opened it again. What he saw was completely different from before. Puppets, rag dolls, wooden swords, tin helmets and small armor, miniature castle sculptures, wooden knights. All of these were his accumulation when he was in Storm's End, and some of them were even the same age as him. With the passage of time, these wooden toys have begun to turn black and dark, and exude a kind of decayed atmosphere, but compared with what he had seen before, they are undoubtedly much cuter. After carefully counting the toys, and finding that there was nothing missing, Renly's last trace of worry in his heart completely dissipated, and then he frowned unconsciously. To say that the box was not originally like this, at most it could move. At first he just thought it was something that was replaced by an animal, but when he tried to destroy it, he found that it was very hard. Then he realized that it was alienated, not replaced. Living in a room that is not your own with a moving box is not a good thing. Although his freedom was greatly restricted by the kidnapping experience, it does not mean that he can always stay in the High Court to guard this thing. Occasionally he would go out, such as hunting, or going out for fun. In this case, you can't ask the servants not to clean the room, and you can't even guarantee that anyone will enter the room. So many of his personal belongings were never placed in the room, but were hidden in other places by him, and this box was obviously one of his personal belongings. So after discovering the alienation, he buried the box at the bottom of a long abandoned tower in the castle. As a result, when he woke up the next morning, it appeared beside him, and the dusty appearance was obviously that it ran back by itself. Renly then moved it to another locked warehouse. However, it still didn't work. It was unclear how this thing opened the lock, but it did open the lock and then ran back. Renly then prepared to throw it away, so he sent it to the suburbs to bury it, but it didn't work either. He threw it off the cliff, burned it, and even hid it in a coffin, and buried it in a cemetery. No matter what he did, the box would run back by itself, as if it had recognized him. Even after the last time in the cemetery, the toys inside became very evil. Except for him, other people would unconsciously develop the desire to kill and be violent when they saw that terrifying situation. Later, Renly thought of a way. He thought that this thing might have recognized his smell or something, but he was afraid that something unexpected would happen if he bled it in, so he urinated in it. Originally, he didn't have much hope, just a try, but he didn't expect that the thing was really stunned by a pee, and completely became honest, and didn't run around with Renly. Afterwards, as Renly continued to urinate, it lay quietly in the room under the bed, without causing any trouble. Renly even found that this thing was an excellent urinal. Not only would it not emit any odor after the lid was closed, but the liquid would also slowly disappear when it flowed into it. He was quite proud of this for a while. But now, did it develop urine resistance? Frowning and staring at the wooden box, Renly felt a little headache. However, experience has shown that, as long as he is near this box, this thing will not move around. So after thinking about it, he simply closed the lid on this thing and secretly decided to take this thing with him when he goes out in the future and never leave it here. How to deal with it later? He couldn't help but look at his left wrist, but did not act immediately. Instead, he took out a dagger from the bedside table, lowered his head and sniffed it, and sighed in disappointment. The reach is ancient, rich, but barren. After forming the knights, Renly has traveled a lot in this land, but he has never encountered a new dungeon medium, so he still only has this dagger he got from the swamplanders. However, this medium is a broken one. Yes, broken. When he first got this dagger, he felt that the fragrance on it was not enough. He originally thought that it could be restored with the passage of time, but it has been 9 years, and the smell on the dagger is still the same, so Renly had to consider other ways to repair it. In fact, he did have a way to repair it, but the price. The hesitation in his heart did not hinder Renly's actions. He sat at the head of the bed, put the dagger on the bedside table, and raised his hand to touch the mark of the 7 gods contract on his left wrist. So after feeling his mind blurred for a while, he heard a familiar girl's voice in a trance. "Do you agree to the deal?" The clear and pleasant voice was filled with a sacred and solemn taste. In a trance, Renly seemed to see a little girl who looked exactly like him when he was a child. "Let's not talk about where I can find a qualified candidate for the archbishop for you. Even if I find one, I can't turn him into a real archbishop at the moment." Renly muttered and replied, "And I only got a dagger in exchange for an archbishop. No matter how I think about it, I feel it's a loss. This dagger carries the breath of the old days, and that is a field that only the old gods of the north can get involved in. For the gods, it must pay a lot to repair this dagger." The mark on the wrist answered like this, and this is also an answer she has repeated many times over countless years. Renly was silent after hearing this. The so-called breath of the old days should be the real medium for him to travel through history, and he is not unfamiliar with the old gods of the north mentioned by the other party, whether in his previous life or in this world. There are 2 dominant beliefs in the continent of Westeros. One is the belief in the 7 gods, represented by the Church of the 7 Gods, also known as the New Gods, and the other is the Old Gods of the North. The faith of the 7 gods was brought by the invasion of the ancient Andals, while the faith of the old gods was the oldest faith in Westeros, spread by the children of the forest, the true natives of Westeros, and once spread throughout the entire continent. However, the world has changed dramatically, and now the faith of the old gods only occupies the northern cold land north of the neck, and the rest basically believe in the 7 gods. It seems that the faith of the 7 gods has the upper hand, but Renly always feels that the northern old god is really awesome. Their priest can also travel through time. This is something in the original drama, but Renly remembered it correctly. The one who rolled his eyes in the original book seemed unable to change history easily, but he was free. Obviously Renly believed that the 7 gods claimed that it would cost a lot to repair the dagger, but he still couldn't make up his mind. Because the other party's condition was that he replaced the archbishop of the 7 god sect with one that the gods were satisfied with. A pope of a sect. Can this thing be replaced casually? Renly didn't think much about it, but changed the subject and asked if the other party could solve the box beside the bed. There must be a price to pay for trading with the gods mentioned by the girl. Don't expect him to help for free. This is an iron rule that Renly has clearly tested over the years, so he didn't communicate with the other party to solve this problem before. After the peeing method took effect, he even forgot about the weirdness of the box. But now that this thing has started to make trouble again, Renly has to set his sights on the 7 gods, who are more mysterious than the box. The other party's reply surprised him. The gods can't solve it for you, because the gods can't solve another god. God? How is this possible? Renly said in disbelief. Aren't all your gods formed by condensing faith? What kind of faith can a box condense? What he didn't say was that although alienation can bring some wonderful changes to objects, it is too exaggerated to create a god. Renly thinks it is impossible. It is another god that the gods have never seen. The girl's voice echoed in his mind, and it seemed to be full of confusion. It gathers the resentment of the dead, the blood of the world, and a breath of divinity. It is the drowned god. Renly was stunned by these words, and then he couldn't help but look at his left wrist. There is one more chapter today. Chapter 205 Nights. Her breathing was steady, her complexion was normal, and there was no unusual change in her heartbeat. However, there were special lines on her face that looked like veins. At first glance, it looked like she was poisoned. Looking at the middle-aged blonde woman who seemed to be sleeping soundly on the bed, Renly narrowed his eyes. This capable subordinate suddenly fell asleep. It was not likely that he had any disease, and poisoning was unlikely. He immediately thought of the power seed that the other party had swallowed. And on the way back from hunting not long ago, this person did say something. "My lord, is mother okay?" A nervous voice beside him asked in a low voice. Renly did not speak, but suddenly squatted at the head of the bed, took a deep breath, and reached out to touch the other party's forehead. It felt a little hot to the touch, but not too strong. As Renly's mind turned and began to urge his thoughts to spread along his fingers, he gradually felt an extraordinary feeling. His whole body began to feel hot. His internal organs and limbs seemed to be constantly itching. His body felt a special awkwardness, and his mind gradually became drowsy, as if he was very sleepy. If he was completely immersed in it, then this feeling would make Renly fall asleep within a few seconds. But in fact, he was not affected too much by it. Most of his thoughts were still normal, and he only felt a little bit of it. This feeling was like a part of the body was injured, and waves of pain continued to come out, but it was only limited to a certain part. And this pain may bring a kind of ripple-like pain to other parts, but it does not hinder the normal operation of other parts at all. Renly let go of the hand that touched the other person, stood up and pondered slightly, seemingly discovering something, but in fact he was still immersed in this feeling. The moment of spiritual communication. Unlike the reception and transmission of emotions in the past spiritual language, this ability that has evolved to this point does not require the other party to be awake to be used. It is like an invading force that can send a wisp of Renly's own thoughts into the other party's body. Using this, Renly can feel the other person's emotional fluctuations and can also perceive all the senses of the other person's body. He can even use this to maintain spiritual communication with the other person. In a sense, this is equivalent to possession, but it cannot take the lead, and it cannot possess two targets at the same time. And now, he can vaguely feel that his body is undergoing some unpredictable changes, and this change has occupied most of the vitality of the body and brain, and even has no energy to stay awake. This change. My lord, the anxious voice beside him interrupted Renly's meditation. He turned his head and found that the face of the handsome boy standing in front of him was full of anxiety at the moment, and he was obviously very panicked. "Your mother will be fine," Renly replied. "If she doesn't wake up today, she will wake up tomorrow." This made the boy's face relax, and he was obviously very convinced by Renly's words. Then he heard Renly say, "Tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, the knights will set out for Hornhill. Remember to be ready." Of course. The boy nodded hurriedly. Seeing his master act like this, he was more relieved about his mother's condition. It was obviously not a serious matter. Otherwise, how could he say anything else? On the contrary, if there are any changes in you, tell me in advance. Renly finally reminded. The mother and son of the White Deer Winder were his confidants, so they would not be left out if there were good things. In other words, Tob in front of him had actually eaten that kind of power seed, which made him more comfortable in his usual night training, but he had not yet experienced this wonderful transformation. That's right, transformation. At first, Baron of the Iron Islands, and later another person possessed by the seed of the ancient road who was felt on his wrist, several death row prisoners who had been experimented on, and the female subordinate in front of him. Many examples have already proved that when this power seed is attached to the human body and grows to a certain extent, it will cause the possessed person's physique to undergo a transformation. This transformation effect may be very strange and useless, such as when Baron once had webbed feet between his toes. Renly didn't know what use that would be, but it could also be very effective, such as when a death row prisoner once Thinking about this in his heart, Renly had already stepped out of the room, leaving Tob to take care of his mother by himself. But Renly did not cut off the connection at the moment of spiritual communication. This kind of connection can be carried out remotely, with a certain distance limit, but not to mention the distance. As long as Renly does not leave the castle, the connection will basically not be interrupted. So he maintained this connection throughout the morning, which somewhat affected his main thinking, and even seemed very absent-minded during the class in the Meester Tower, which made the old Meester who taught him quite helpless. But it was difficult to say anything to this Duke, who had been smart since childhood. In the afternoon, Renly took the initiative to cut off this connection, because the other party's main thinking had awakened to some extent, and it should be no big deal. As expected, not long after, he learned from Tob, who came to report the news, that the White Deer Winder had awakened. He ran to see that the other party seemed a little weak, and was very confused about this. For a while, he could not see any changes. Renly did not rush to ask more questions. After telling him to have a good rest, he walked towards the training ground in the castle. The members of the knights who were notified before had already arrived. In my opinion, since the murderer ran to the Hornhill area, it should be a bad thing for the Tully family. The dusklight shone on the neat stone brick surface of the training ground, dyeing the grey and white stone ground with a light color. The thin and tall young man leaning against a wooden stake in the training ground said to the 5 companions sitting together in front of him, "Then maybe we can get some commissions from the Tully family?" As soon as he finished speaking, a black and white monkey squatting on his shoulder grabbed his master's hair and chirped a few times, as if agreeing. However, this remark caused a rebuttal from a companion in front. "Come on, Mark, Lord Randall Tully has a bad temper. You want to get scolded? I don't want to." The one who spoke was Garland, a brown-haired boy with a green stubble on his chin. As a friend who grew up with Renly, he was naturally a member of the Knights. "You have to be reasonable, even if you have a bad temper." The tall and thin man named Mark laughed and said, "We go to his territory to help him get rid of a bad guy. This is a good thing for him, right? If it's a good thing, there is naturally a possibility of payment. Don't you think so, Senford?" The person he was looking at was a strong square-faced young man. After hearing the words, he glanced at him coldly and didn't say anything, appearing to be very silent. "You are indeed going to visit the Tully family?" Willis, who was sitting next to Renly, said at this time. "At the last harvest banquet, Earl Tully formally invited our knights to visit. Does he have a mission?" "No, it should be for his son." "Is it the fat boy named Samwell?" "Yes. I heard he is a coward." The people present were actually all familiar faces. Willis, the heir to Highgarden, his brother Garland, Renly's follower Tob, Renly himself, and 2 members of the knights who came from nearby, Mark Melendal who raised monkeys, and the dull Zenford. There were not many people, but not all members. Some of them were too far away, or had something to do, and had no contact. In other words, in their view, this trip to the Hornhill area to hunt down criminals was originally a group trip, so naturally whoever had the time would come. However, as a member who had to use crutches to walk, Willis could only act as the steward of the knights and could not follow them, so there were only 5 people on the road, and if the servants were counted, there were more than 10 people. This is not a small amount. As a tour group plus an organization that is hunting down a wanted criminal, it is obviously more than enough. The members in the venue have been discussing the fact that the iron-blooded Tully family has a cowardly heir. It is not very nutritious, but full of gossip. Perhaps he is a little impatient. The sturdy young man Senford who has been silent all the time suddenly asked, "When do we leave?" This made everyone subconsciously look at Renly who was also silent on the other side, and after thinking for a moment, he gave an answer. "Tomorrow." Thank you to the book friend Linengzi for the 500 reward, and thank you to the book friend Zyanatang 246 for the 100 reward. Chapter 206, Travel and Sacrifice. At the edge of a crossroad in the forest, there was a short and sturdy old oak tree. A trunk of the tree extended out and blocked the intersection. Several rotten and smelly corpses were hung on ropes. Now they were swaying with the breeze. The sunlight shining in from outside the shade of the tree covered these corpses, and also made the narrow shadows swaying on the mud surface with the wind in the forest. The summer wind was stuffy and hot, mixed with the rotten stench of the corpses, making the two horsemen on the windy road cover their noses and curse. But as scouts, they could not ignore any unusual signs. So the two men went directly against the wind and rode their horses to the front of the row of corpses. The rotten green faces that looked like rags were very scary, but a wooden sign hanging on the neck of one of them made them feel relieved. "You damned robbers, all go to hell." Behind the scouts, a team of knights were hurrying along at a leisurely pace. The leader was a black-haired knight in neat leather armor and a cloak. The fitted clothes made him look handsome and majestic. Beside him rode a thin knight in brown leather armor. Further behind, several other knights were chatting and laughing with their servants, looking quite relaxed. At the end of the team was a carriage, carrying the knight's armor, supplies, tents and other items. "Are you still thinking about your mother?" There were bursts of bird calls in the deep woods around, and the sound of horses tapping under their feet was continuous, as if with some kind of rhythm. Riding on a black horse, Renly asked the handsome boy beside him casually. The handsome young man on horseback blushed after hearing this, then nodded honestly and said, "I'm just worried about whether she will be in danger. She is much stronger than before. How can she be in danger?" Renly asked seriously, "Or do you blame me for always letting your mother run around?" No sir, I don't mean that." Hearing this, the other party hurriedly shook his head. "My mother doesn't want to live a quiet life. This is her own choice. How can I blame you?" "And you?" This guy's anxious explanation made Renly smile, and then waved his hand and said, "Then don't think about those useless things. Think about how to complete this mission. You are here. Why do I need to think?" The other party answered in a low voice, causing Renly to glare at him. "Then I had lunch at noon today, so you don't need to eat?" The other party didn't dare to speak, lowered his head, and looked quite ashamed. Seeing this, Renly sighed helplessly. It was the third day since they left Highgarden. Their destination was the Hornhill area just south of Highgarden. They didn't encounter any troubles along the way. It wasn't that the security in the Reach was very good. It was mainly because they were fully armed and looked tough. Ordinary bandits didn't dare to approach them. In fact, there were all kinds of dangers in the wilds of the Seven Kingdoms. There were a lot of bandits who didn't want to be farmers. They often encountered all kinds of ferocious beasts in the forest. The division of territories under the feudal system made the lords all local overlords in their respective territories. Even the feudal lords could not interfere in the affairs of their territories at will. Therefore, due to the different abilities of the lords, the security situation in each piece of land was different. When walking outside, you have to know all these things, such as which old lord died, and the new lord took over, which lord has outstanding ruling ability, which lord is more bloodthirsty and deterrent, and which one is a fool, etc. Years of experience in going out have made the members of the Knights familiar with this, which is one of the reasons why they are so relaxed now. Otherwise, if they were walking in a territory with poor security, they would have put on full plate armor and hurried on their way. It is summer now, and the climate is hot and humid. Although the plate armor is made of steel, you still have to wear a padded cotton jacket and mail and leather armor under the plate armor, which is equivalent to putting on layers of warm clothes. If it is not necessary, no one will wear it like this in summer, otherwise it will not take long for the heat to get heat stroke. "My lord, what kind of ability do you think I will gain?" The thin knight beside him asked in a low voice after a moment of shame. "Like my mother, I can hear more and see farther. It depends on when you wake up." Renly answered with a word that seemed very strange to others. That night after waking up from the coma, his intelligence chief, White Deer Winder, noticed that his 5 senses had been enhanced to a certain extent. It was not too exaggerated, but it was obviously beyond ordinary people. This seems to be a favorable change for gathering intelligence. Renly guessed whether this change happened because the other party had been gathering intelligence, but there were not many specific examples, and he could not summarize any awakening secrets from it. "I hope to be like my mother." That kind of Tob's words were interrupted by a noisy sound in front of him before he finished speaking. Looking up, the 2 scouts who had been running in front were now trotting over on horseback. What happened? Without Renly's order, Tob rode forward to greet them. "There is a caravan ahead." One of the scouts replied, "They have heard of our name and want to hire us to take them to Rivendell." Rivendell is not far from Hornhill, but it also needs to change its route. After hearing this, the knights behind looked at Renly again, waiting for his decision. This knight group is just for fun, because there are not many people, and there is no division of leader and vice leader. But after a few years, the members have already regarded Renly as their leader. There is no other reason. This man has the most outstanding fighting ability, the most methods, the least competitive temperament, and his status can suppress them, the nobles of the river reach. So if there is anything, they will let Renly make the decision. What is that caravan transporting? Renly asked. Some pet puppies transported from King's Landing. The scout replied, the kind bred by Grand Maester Purcell himself. This made several members of the knights look at each other in surprise, and then the brown-haired boy Tyrell couldn't help but say something. Can we buy it? Go ask. Mark, who raises monkeys, echoed. If you can buy it, I can just give one to my mother. I don't think it's possible. That thing is too popular. The taciturn Knights member Zenfort couldn't help but say something. They obviously attach great importance to this, but they don't attach importance to this employment. In recent years, in addition to the changes in the situation and people in Westeros, there have been many other changes. For example, the nobles from all over the Seven Kingdoms learned that Grand Maester Purcell of King's Landing is good at breeding pet dogs. The dogs he breeds are very smart. They can't be said to understand human language, but they are far beyond ordinary. Smart dogs, rare numbers, coupled with the reputation of Grand Maester Purcell, have made this kind of dog more and more popular in Westeros, and even become a luxury item for nobles to compete with each other. If a noble family doesn't have this thing, it is simply a very face-losing thing. Renly has also seen that kind of dog. It is indeed smart, and its hair is smooth and shiny. It is very beautiful, but he doesn't think there is anything too strange about it. Relatively speaking, he is more curious about why the Grand Maester is not doing his job, and is a dog dealer. It is said that the dogs raised by Grand Maester Purcell are very fertile, and there are too many to keep, so they have to be sold. This rumor circulating in the streets is not known to be true or false. Renly decided to investigate carefully when he returned to King's Landing. For now, he has no objection to taking a new mission midway, mainly because he did not just want to travel or hunt this time, but also to try his luck around, and he did not rule out temporarily traveling more to change the target. So he took the interested members to take a look. There were more than a dozen barking puppies in the carriage cages, which were relatively rare, but the leading merchant treasured them like a treasure. But he was rather stingy, and the price he offered to the members of the Knights was not high, and he did not intend to sell the dogs midway, so the members had no interest in taking this mission. Renly felt that the merchant was a bit strange, so he gave up the idea of walking a little further. After that, there was a smooth journey, green fields, forests, streams and lakes, day and night, until the surrounding green grass began to gradually become uneven and sloping, and a square castle standing on the top of the hill came into view in the dim light. The Tully family's Hornhill city has arrived, and the members of the Knights are very excited about it. The plan was to inquire about the news while visiting, so they rushed straight to the magnificent castle, but the peace along the way seemed to finally disappear here. Before arriving at the foot of Hornhill City, Renly suddenly saw a special situation. Several red-robed monks are now at the edge of a stream, pushing a fat boy into a bathtub full of blood regardless of struggling and screaming, muttering some difficult words. There are many people watching around them. It seems to be a sacrifice scene, but what Renly cares about is not the sacrifice, but the red robes. From the intelligence, it is learned that many red-robed monks active in Westeros are basically guys looking for a door. There is another chapter today. Chapter 207, Conspiracy emerges. Carefully lying in the bushes, watching the unroofed cargo wagon swaying in the distance, and the dozen armed riders around the wagon moving along the landslide green grass road, and finally blending into a group of nobles at the edge of the stream, a pointed-faced boy breathed a sigh of relief, then curiously glanced at the barrel and boy splashed with blood at the stream. He reluctantly climbed up, turned his head, and ran in the direction of the back. The boy was more than 10 years old, and his posture was agile and swift when running, so that everything behind him quickly disappeared, and he ran into a forest not far away in a short while, and ran for a long time in familiarity, and finally came to a cabin in the forest panting. The cabin existed alone in the clearing in the forest. It was a wooden house built by the local Tully family specifically for the ranger, but at this time, there were not only the rangers in it. Captain Mika, the group of horsemen have met the Tullys. The pointed-faced boy ran into the wooden house, ignoring the others in the house, and shouted to the silver-haired man in the lead, "Our mission is complete. It's not up to you to decide whether it's completed or not, kid." A gray-haired old man dressed as a businessman glared at the boy, then turned to look at the silver-haired man in the lead. "Sir, do you need us to keep an eye on them?" If there were members of the Knights, they would find that they had seen this businessman not long ago, and he was the dog dealer. The task they assigned to us is just to lead the Knights to the Tully family. The silver-haired leader waved his hand and said, "If you want us to do more, you have to pay more." "When did they pay the rest of the money?" A bearded young man sitting on the floor in the room complained. "Captain Mika, tell them to pay more. I was almost shot to death by an arrow from Earl Rowan, and my butt still hurts. Forget about the extra money. Those guys are always stingy." Someone continued, "And what does it have to do with them, whether you're dead or alive? How can it not matter? You don't have such a famous name as me. If I died, how could you lead those people from the Knights of the Silver Hand out of Highgarden?" They began to babble about some boring words, while the leader over there was talking about more important things with several other more stable people. "Why do they want to lead people to Hornhill? It has nothing to do with us. It must be related to the king's younger brother." The old man dressed as a merchant said, "What's his name?" "Stephen. It's Renly." The silver-haired man in the lead snorted and replied, "Stephen is the name of his father." The tone of this man was not normal. Seeing this, a middle-aged man with a beard in the house asked, "Do you know Renly?" "Yes." The silver-haired man said something inexplicably, but did not explain in detail. Instead, he stood up and announced to the group of people in the house, "Since the mission is completed, we must leave here as soon as possible. Will you take people to watch the back to prevent people from surrounding us? Lemon, you are a scout and lead the way. Is it necessary to be so anxious?" The people in the house were surprised. "The mission is completed, why not leave?" The silver-haired man said, without much explanation, but strode out of the wooden house first, and walked towards a horse tied not far away. The kid was cunning and mysterious, and very difficult to deal with. Now this bigger one is even more difficult to deal with. A little calculation will be enough. She doesn't want to stay here and increase the risk, but thinking of those hidden people in the Tully family, the silver-haired man on the horse flashed a strange pity in his eyes and muttered in a low voice, "Gods in heaven bless you, you'd better kill him smoothly." Renly on the other side didn't know that he had fallen into an unknown trap. At this time, he was in the crowd at the edge of the stream, talking to a bald middle-aged nobleman with a calm temperament. He inherited too much of the Florent family's foxy courage. "I even suspect that a witch cast a curse on him when he was born. Otherwise why would he be so timid? So I invited these two red-robed monks, hoping that they can bring a miracle." As he said this, the bald middle-aged man with a serious face kept staring at the fat boy who was pressed into the blood by the red-robed monks, listening to the boy's loud screams like a pig being slaughtered, and his eyelids kept trembling. Renly, who was standing aside, initially thought that this man might be distressed. After all, the one who was pressed into the blood was his son, but after a little attention, he found that this man was annoyed. This made him look at the bloody little fat man who was struggling in the barrel not far away. Although he was surprised to suddenly see a few old disciples, he did not panic, but instead brought the knights closer, because Renly wanted to see how these people would react when they met him, and whether they had relevant detection capabilities. As a result, the red-robed monks were always focused on dealing with the little fat man at hand, and had no intention of paying attention to the situation of other people around them. So Renly went to the leader of the crowd, the Earl of Hornhill, whom he had met several times before, Randyll Tarly. That was the bald middle-aged nobleman next to him. This special scene under Hornhill Castle could not have been caused by anyone else. In fact, all this was arranged by this famous general in the River Reach who was known for his iron blood. The purpose was to change the cowardly character of his only son, the screaming fat boy, through blood magic. If Renly remembered correctly, the fat boy named Samuel Tully was one of the protagonists in the play, and later seemed to have become a university scholar, but his memory of what happened before the ending was quite vague in his previous life, and he just remembered that he seemed to be very timid. In recent years in the Riverage, he has heard some of the deeds of this fat boy. For example, he likes to listen to music, like dancing, like eating, drinking and having fun, but his character is surprisingly cowardly, and he doesn't even dare to see blood. If there is anything worth mentioning in the Reach, then how Lord Tully of Hornhill disciplines his timid son is one of the more interesting ones. Renly didn't remember the other rumors, but the one that impressed him the most was that a while ago, in order to arouse his son's desire to resist, Lord Tully had someone put his son in his mother's female clothes, and then took him around the castle in public, with the purpose of humiliating his son and making him angry, but the result was only a chubby boy with a tearful face. After all, Lord Randall Tully is also a top general in Westeros. He once led his army to defeat the current king, but he was helpless about his son's character problems. He used various methods one after another, but none of them worked, which made him worry to death. It is worth mentioning that the name of the Valyrian steel sword handed down by the Tully family is Broken Heart. Renly believes that the curse in his mouth may be caused by that sword. Weird thoughts flashed through his mind while Renly began to watch the excitement. He observed the crying fat boy for a while and found that he seemed to have been frightened by the blood all over his body and could only cry. 2 of the 4 red-robed monks surrounding him were responsible for suppressing the fat boy's body to prevent him from struggling, and the remaining 2 were responsible for chanting spells. Unfortunately, they did not finish chanting the spell. The crying fat boy fainted while crying. His motionless appearance caused a commotion here. The Countess, who was also in the crowd, directly dismissed the monks and then asked someone to hurriedly carry her son out of the blood bucket and hurriedly bring him back to Hornhill. The spell has taken effect, your lord. Several red-robed monks were embarrassed after being pushed away by the woman, but one of them stepped forward with a bald middle-aged man calmly and said, Master Tully will change after waking up. According to our experience, you can take him to the training ground for experiments in 3 days, and you will see obvious changes. Then please stay at Hornhill for 3 days. The bold middle-aged noble said seriously after hearing this. If it really works, I will not be stingy with money and rewards. We are not keen on money, your lord. The calm-looking red-robed monk said, we only ask for your help in finding something in the Hornhill area. After he finished speaking, he glanced at where Renly was seemingly unintentionally, and then left with his men. Renly frowned because he just felt a layer of hidden hostility, but before he could think about it, Lord Tully, who had been staring at his son before, came up to talk to him again. It was not limited to Renly, but also several other members of the Silver Hand Knights. Because there was once a Green Hand Knights in the Reach, which was very famous in the 7 Kingdoms. Their small knights were officially named the Silver Hand Knights at the suggestion of Willis, the heir of Highgarden. This is barely a metaphor, hoping that the knights can establish countless great achievements like the Green Hand Knights, but in fact, in Renly's view, the name of Silver Hand can be expanded to be seen as a hand that receives silver coins, because the current role of the knights is to collect money and do things, which is not noble. In fact, they originally wanted to call it Golden Hand, but Renly felt that Golden Hand was too vulgar, like an Alvorish, and silver was much more restrained. So this name was decided. Over the past few years, the Knights of the Silver Hand were not very famous in the Reach, but they were basically known by the nobles of the Reach. Not long ago, at the Harvest Banquet, Lord Tully had invited the Knights to visit Hornhill. Renly had guessed at the time. Now, after such a conversation, the other party's purpose was very clear. He hoped that the Knights of the Order could stay in Hornhill for a few days and take care of his useless son. It would be best to let Sam feel the grace and power of a knight and let him yearn for the life of a knight. The bold Lord Tully said so, obviously no longer hopeful about the previous blood magic, or to say that he had made a second-hand preparation. Renly was very puzzled why the other party chose them, because the Tully family had many knights under their command. As a result, the other party's answer was very simple. The people of the Silver Hand Knights had a bright appearance and looked very eye-catching. The special composition of the knights and the short but rich history also had certain bragging capital. Renly felt a little speechless about this, but still claimed to try his best. At the same time, he was also very curious about the situation of those red-robed monks, so he did not leave in a hurry. That night, Lord Tully held a welcome dinner for the knights at Hornhill. All members of the Tully family were present. Lady Tully, who was born in the Florent family of Brightwater, even talked to Renly about the Florent wife that his brother Stannis married. However, Renly was not familiar with his second sister-in-law. He remembered that she was an ugly woman with a long beard and seemed to have a bad personality. He did not see the fat boy Samwell at the banquet. It was said that he was too weak to get out of bed. However, he saw several of his sisters. One of them was precocious and blushed when she came to see Renly, which caused a good-natured laugh. The continent of Westeros is not modern, and information and transportation are not very convenient. Even the children of nobles cannot be said to be very knowledgeable. In other words, most of the noble girls were basically bound in the castle towers since childhood to learn women's work and etiquette education, and were used as capital for marriage when they grew up. Obviously, not all noble girls have excellent emotional intelligence or mature personalities. When faced with a tall, unfamiliar and handsome knight, they often have amorous feelings, and it is not uncommon for them to fall in love at first sight. Renly has been running around in recent years, and has been a guest in the homes of nobles in various parts of the River Bay. He has always encountered such situations, but he never stays in one place for too long, so he has not developed any relationship beyond the boundaries with any noble girl. The girl from the Tully family in front of him can't even be called a girl. She seems to be in her teens, so he didn't care much about it. Instead, he focused on chatting with the host here, hoping to learn clues about the target of this mission and the red-robed monks in the castle. However, not long after, he had to focus on the little girl who blushed at him again, because he heard a sentence. "If I'll let him drink this, will Lord Renly really fall in love with me?" The pure and clear voice emerged in his heart, but it was not heard by his ears. On the surface, Renly picked up a glass of wine and tasted it without changing his expression, but in his heart, he paid most of his attention to the outside of the banquet. Because he had felt hostility, he had released his eagle to track a certain target before, and now, the voice was transmitted through the moment of psychic communication, not in the banquet, but in the castle. "Of course, Miss Terra, this is the magic potion we carefully prepared. As long as the Lord drinks it, he will immediately like you." This is the voice of the leading red-robed monk. Chapter 208, Eyes and Ears in the Sky. The square castle was very lively at night. The servants were busy carrying food and drinks to serve the banquet. The moonlight in the sky was covered by dark clouds from time to time, but it would soon be revealed. The hazy light was shrouded by a spotted grey falcon that landed on a tall oak tree, making it look like an inconspicuous owl. But this owl was obviously much smarter than normal. It leaned sideways and grabbed the tree trunk with its claws. Its big black eyes stared at the closed tower room next to it through the narrow window without blinking, obviously observing. The room had only one window, and the glass inlaid was not pure. Looking inside through the window, one could only see two figures, one large and one small, standing face to face in front of the window. Under the candlelight, they looked like two human-shaped torches wrapped in yellow light. Although the vision was blocked, the sensitive and unique hearing still allowed the owl to hear some vague words coming from inside the room. They were not loud, but they were clear. "Of course, Miss Terra, this is a magic potion we have carefully prepared. As long as he drinks it, he will immediately like you." There was a hint of solemnity in the steady voice, but the meaning of the words was obviously not a good thing. "This medicine has a unique fragrance, Miss Terra. You can disguise it as wine and offer it to him, and then you must see him drink it, and stay in the room for a while, and you should also drink a sip yourself, so that he can see you at first sight after the effect of the medicine takes effect, and then he will like you. Will there be any harm?" The little girl's voice was a little hesitant. "And does it really work?" "Of course it works." The red-robed monk's voice began to speak. "When we were in Essos, we sold this potion to the rich ladies there all year round. Miss Terra, this is our specialty. There are at least hundreds of people who have drunk this medicine. There will be no mistakes." "Do they all fall in love with each other after drinking it? Have there been any accidents?" the little girl asked repeatedly. The effect is exactly the same as I said. And there have never been any accidents. The other party answered patiently. Is that so? That's good. The little girl believed it easily, but still hesitated. But what if he doesn't drink it? You can claim that this is the wine you brewed yourself and want that gentleman to help taste it. As a well-educated noble, he won't refuse you. Or you can. The red-robed monk in the house offered some tricks, all of which were heard by the owl outside the house. Finally, it tilted its head and felt a thought coming from the bottom of its heart, so it suddenly flapped its wings and flew away quickly. As if hearing a noise, the red-robed monk in the house suddenly looked out the window, but the difference in light inside and outside made him unable to see anything unusual, so he didn't care, but opened his mouth to give a final reminder. Remember, Miss Terror, you must see him drink it with your own eyes before you drink it, and then wait for a while, otherwise your efforts will be in vain. I remember. In the banquet hall on the other side, Renly was still talking to Randyll Tarly beside him without any change of expression about some issues concerning their knights, including this mission and some issues concerning the relationship between nobles. Lord Drown's cousin was killed by the bandit, so he hired us to help hunt down the murderer at Hornhill. Why didn't he send someone himself? Was he afraid that I would stop him? Lord Drown believed that Lord Tarly would not cooperate with this matter because of the old grudge. Old grudge? That Mattis is really flattering himself. He is just afraid that I will pursue a bad debt with his family. You have to know, Lord Renly, I once had a small piece of land near Golden Tree City. Judging from his appearance alone, Randyll Tarly is a rigid and serious person, with facial features as hard as stone carvings, and rarely smiles on his face. Moreover, when talking to him, Renly found that his temper is indeed as stubborn as the rumors say, and he speaks straightforwardly without knowing how to cover up. However, in a sense, this kind of person is easier to deal with, and compared to those hypocritical guys who say one thing and do another, Renly prefers to communicate with this kind of people. As for Earl Tully, he initially thought that this young man was just a young knight of noble status, who might have certain abilities, but he didn't take it too seriously. He just thought that it would be best if he could help discipline his useless son. If he couldn't help, he would just keep him well fed and well drinked, and then prevent him from having any accidents at home. However, the more Earl Tully felt later, the more comfortable he felt communicating with this young man. He didn't feel any hypocrisy in the conversations, and the other party didn't hide anything. He was calm but humorous, and many of his words touched his heart. This was simply a special enjoyment. At the beginning, he could even take care of the young knights of several other knight orders at the banquet, but later he completely ignored those boring people, and even the countess on the side secretly poked him several times without getting a response. In the end, he could only call his own knights to come forward and talk to him, so as not to make the scene too embarrassing. Lord Tully thought he had met a confidant, so he was chatting so happily, but he obviously would not have imagined that Renly, who possessed some kind of psychic talent, was actually very capable in diplomacy, but he was just too lazy to use it under normal circumstances. As for why he used it now, it was naturally because he wanted to find out some information. For example, some information about the Red Monks, and some recent developments at Hornhill. Those Red Monks were hostile to him, and Renly initially wondered if they really had some means of detection, and recognized him as a door. So Renly sent out a falcon he had trained for many years to get the news, relying on the moment of spiritual communication. He had trained several of these eyes and ears in the sky over the years, and he would bring one or two with him every time he went out, but he would not call them down normally. Then, as he observed, Renly discovered that the truth was not like this. Although the hostility of those red-robed monks was a little inexplicable, it was obviously not the kind when facing a big villain. Instead, it seemed that they had planned it long ago. But if they had planned it long ago after recognizing that he was the one behind the door, why didn't they ambush him halfway, but had to wait until he arrived at the Hornhill? They didn't really recognize what he was. Renly was sure of this. But why would they be hostile to him, and even plan to use the little girl to plot against him? He had some guesses about this, but he couldn't be sure, so he was ready to fight back. and his means of fighting back were very simple. Lord Tarly, after the banquet, I hope to invite you to see a good show. After feeling that the time was almost right, Renly suddenly said, thank you to the book friend Menilicky and Woody for the 5,000 reward. Thank you to the book friends Sanki and Mengi and the book friends Wet Eggplant for the 1,000 reward. Thank you to the book friend Fiang Marksu for the 200 reward. And thank you to the book friend Zyanatang 246 for the 100 reward. Chapter 209. Simple Girl. The deep red liquid glowed with an intoxicating and charming color under the candlelight. With a slight shake, the viscous liquid stained the inner wall of the bottle with a layer of crystal red. Open the bottle mouth and sniff it lightly. An alluring aroma of wine rushed into the nostrils, which made Terra, who was originally nervous, inexplicably stable. It will definitely succeed. The little girl secretly cheered herself up and then tidied up the light pink dress she had sewn by hand in front of the mirror in the room. She looked around for a long time and didn't know what she thought of. A blush flashed across her face. That Lord Renly was a very handsome man, with a good family background and a powerful knight. If he chose a marriage partner, there would be no one more suitable than him. I think his parents would not refuse him. But, isn't this a bit bad? Looking down at the bottle of wine in her hand, Terra hesitated in her heart, but then some words she had overheard not long ago emerged in her mind. Don't even think about Sam's marriage to Desmara Redwine. He made too many embarrassments on the arbor. Old Redwine won't be interested in him. But maybe we can think about Terra's marriage. Old Redwine has 2 sons. Although they are currently being held hostage in King's Landing, I guess they will be brought back sooner or later. What about appearance and personality? Terra remembered her mother once asked this question. There is no beautiful one in the Redwine family. As for personality, I have asked around. She is not very honest, but she is not bad either. Terra is not even 10 years old yet. Isn't it too early? What do you mean early? Girls should get married early. Don't forget that you gave me 3 daughters. If I don't hurry up and arrange it, if there is no suitable candidate, the arbor is an island. If I don't seize this opportunity, I will marry into the sea. Just thinking about it, Terra's hesitation completely disappeared, and she became determined. How terrible it is to marry into the sea, and marry into the Redwine family. Terra had seen the Redwine family before. They were ugly, and had very strange orange hair. Lord Renly with black hair was the most pleasing to the eye, she thought as she walked out of the house with the bottle of wine in her hand. Although she had only met him once, he was really handsome. He looked so tall and straight on horseback, and his short black hair seemed to shine. And his eyes were simply. Just thinking about it made Terra's imagination run wild, and this also made her more determined. Don't marry into the sea. The sea is too scary. It looks like a huge monster, so don't go there. And don't marry the orange-haired weirdo of the Redwine family. Marry Lord Renly. Make Lord Renly fall in love with me. 2. It seems that Lord Renly's territory is also the sea. Terra suddenly thought of this question. She had heard her father talk about this before. It seemed to be something. Dragonstone? If it is an island, it must be the sea, right? Then. Never mind. If it's Lord Renly, the sea doesn't matter. Thinking of this, Terra's face was determined, and she stepped into the dim corridor of the castle, vowing to take the future into her own hands. At this time, the banquet outside was over, and it was already very late. The corridor was empty. Normally, Terra might be scared because of this, but now she was thinking about what to say later, and had no time to care about anything else. Hello, Sir Renly, I'm Terra Tarly, and I greeted you at the banquet. This is the wine I brewed myself, sir. Please have a taste. We can't get married right away, Sir Renly. My mother said it's about time to wait until we are 13 years old, but we can get engaged first. What will the child be named? Such an important matter is of course up to you to decide. I just want to be a gentle and virtuous wife. Oh, do I have to name it? Then I'll think about it. The little girl was thinking about the name while walking, and before she knew it, she had arrived at the door of the target room. This made her mind disappear instantly. She stared blankly at the dark brown oak door in front of her, and her heartbeat began to accelerate. After hesitating for a long time, she barely mustered up the courage to knock on the door. The dull knocking sounded quite loud in the quiet corridor, but the people in the room were obviously not asleep yet because they were followed by a question. Who is it? Hello, Lord Renly. My lord, I am. The little girl standing at the door stuttered for a long time, but she never finished her words, and her face became redder and redder. But then she heaved a sigh of relief, because the door in front of her was opened, but the girl didn't dare to look at the young knight in front of her, so she had to lower her head, tug at the corner of her clothes with her little hands, and said with a blushing face, Lord Renly, I am Terror. I'm visiting you, because I want to. Do you want to treat our Lord Renly to a drink, Terror? The familiar and cold voice that came suddenly startled the little girl. She looked up and found that there was another person standing next to her lover. Father? She looked up at the familiar and stereotyped face in front of her in amazement, and her stuttering words suddenly became much smoother. Why are you here? The bold middle-aged noble glared at her, but didn't say anything. Instead, he turned his head and greeted behind him, and then another more familiar face came into the little girl's eyes. Ah, mother. The quiet night was broken by a scream, and then, the Hornhill Castle, which had been quiet because of the end of the dinner, suddenly became noisy. Under the order of the owner, a large group of guards from the Tully family rushed to the building where some people lived in the castle. As a guest, Garland Tyrrell was tossing and turning in bed because he drank too much wine and didn't notice the movement outside. As a result, he heard a knock on the door after a while. Garland, get up quickly, let's go and watch the fun. What fun is there to watch at this hour? The brown-haired boy lying on the bed grinned, facing the urinal below, and answered in a daze, I want to vomit. Don't talk to me. Why are you vomiting? Wait until you finish watching the fun. No. It has something to do with Renly. How can it be related to Renly? The boy muttered, and suddenly he jumped up with a start. He started playing that damn harp again at this hour. Then I have to go and see. What damn harp? Someone framed him and was exposed. Come on, if you don't come, I'll go by myself. The voice outside the door urged. Framed? Garland's heart skipped a beat when he heard this, and then he put on his boots without hesitation and ran out, not caring that he was only wearing a linen pajamas. Waiting outside the house was Mark, who kept monkeys in the nights. Now he saw that his companion was wearing thin clothes and didn't pay much attention to it. Instead, he took his companion's arm and walked quickly towards the tower. What do you mean by framed? Garland had not forgotten this. I don't know the details. The trial is going on now. Trial? The brown-haired boy was stunned for a moment, feeling that the matter seemed a bit serious, but seeing his companion's appearance, it seemed that Renly was fine, so he was relieved. After many twists and turns, the two finally arrived at the government hall of the Tully family. As far as the eye could see, there was already a large group of people gathered here, and the other members of the knights were also present. Most of the Tully family members and servants in the castle gathered here. Looking around, Garland saw his companion Renly standing at the first place and Lord Randall Tully sitting on the chair, as well as the four red-robed monks who were pressed to the ground by the soldiers opposite them. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210. No more words needed. The night breeze blew in through the open doorway of the hall, dispelling the stuffy air inside the hall due to the large number of people, and also making the candlelight on the iron chandelier on the ceiling flicker. The crowd surrounding the hall was quite dense, and the shadows reflected on the ground gathered together, as if they had turned into a huge shadow monster, which was now crouching quietly, staring at the red-robed beings surrounded in the center. I just provided this magic potion to Miss Terror according to her instructions, Lord Earl. The four red-robed monks were pressed down and knelt in the middle of the hall, facing the bald noble sitting on the lord's chair on the stairs in front, and one of them spoke calmly. Just like you asked us to treat your son, this is just a special service. My daughter is not even 10 years old, and you want to serve her instead of me. Lord Tully, sitting in the lord's chair, sneered and said, you can argue, Savik, you can argue as much as you want, but the more lies you tell, the less likely I will let you die happily next. "This is not a lie, my lord." Faced with the threat, the red monk remained calm. Maybe we were indeed not thoughtful enough, but he was interrupted before he finished his words, because Lord Tully had signaled to the soldier next to him to feed him the bottle of wine. But Renly, who had been observing, suddenly made a suggestion. "Wait a minute, Lord Tully, he is the leader and knows a lot. It's best to let others drink this bottle of wine first." At the same time, as he spoke, he stepped closer to take a look, then raised his hand and pulled off all the necklaces on the red-robed monks' necks. Then, the faces of the red-robed monks who had been relatively calm suddenly changed, and then facing the approaching bottle of wine, one of the red-robed monks shouted in panic, wait, I confess. This is poison, not some magic potion. This is a poison we prepared to assassinate Renly." These words caused the crowd to fall into an uproar. The leading red-robed monk cursed his companions for their betrayal so readily, and struggled violently, appearing very angry. "What's the purpose?" In the noisy environment, Earl Tully sitting in the Lord's chair asked angrily, "Why do you want to assassinate Lord Renly?" The conversation at the banquet not long ago made him like the young man Renly very much. That would have been fine, but the other party had a special identity. If he really died in his own home, it would inevitably cause a lot of trouble. In this situation, how could he not be angry? He once killed one of our companions. The confessing red monk shouted, "He and his knights once killed. He is lying. Lord Earl, please let him drink it." Renly on the side suddenly spoke again. Although Lord Tully felt strange, he did not hesitate. After waving his hand, the soldier ignored the red monk's terrified and struggling posture and forced the wine into his mouth. The other red monks turned pale, and what happened next shocked everyone present. The red monk who was poured several mouthfuls of wine fell to the ground and coughed with a painful face, but after a while, he stood up with red skin all over his body, breathing heavily, and his eyes were terrified, but he couldn't help looking at several female figures in the crowd. At first, he was able to stay awake and tremble in place, but gradually, as time passed, he seemed unable to bear it, and began to struggle under the restraints of the soldiers, saliva flowing from his mouth, his eyes full of lust and violence, his original rationality becoming increasingly scarce, and the instinctive animal desire in his body quickly took over. In the end, this red-robed monk who originally had a certain charlatan demeanor had turned into a beast who was roaring and struggling, trying to pounce on a certain woman in the crowd. The two soldiers tried their best to pull him, but gradually they couldn't hold on. The other party seemed to have a super strong power, far from ordinary, so more soldiers rushed forward to pounce on him. The messy hall became more and more noisy, and someone whispered in a low voice that expressed the thoughts of everyone present. "What a strong aphrodisiac." The monk had lost all his sanity, but he was incredibly strong. In this situation, watching all this, the first Earl Tully had a gloomy face, and his hands that were holding the chair were clenched into fists, with veins bulging. He couldn't imagine what would happen to his daughter if she really asked Renly to drink this thing at that time. Serious injury? It seemed to be the least of the consequences. As expected, the effect of this potion will last for a long time. A calm voice came from the side. Looking sideways, the black-haired young knight standing there was now squinting at the roaring beast in the center of the hall, with a calm expression on his face, as if it had nothing to do with him. "Then I will obviously become a rapist who rapes to death," he said, turning his head to look at the angry bold middle-aged man. "And you, Lord Tully, even if you felt something was wrong afterwards, you would not let me go. At the very least, you would imprison me in the dungeons of Hornhill, and then negotiate with my brother. In serious cases, you would kill me directly for revenge. What do you want to say?" the Earl asked in a cold voice. It was not directed at Renly, but he was extremely angry at the moment. "Even if you don't kill me, they will probably let me die in the dungeons of Hornhill," Renly said, turning back to look at the remaining three red-robed monks, and found that the leader was staring at him with cold sweat, obviously having heard these words. "Then, there will be rumors outside that you killed your enemy to avenge your daughter, but you killed his brother without the king's consent, and there has been no trial. What will the king think? Will he believe your one-sided story? In this case, will he invite you to King's Landing for a confrontation? If so, do you want to go? Do you think that you once defeated the young king on the Iron Throne? Will he settle old grudges with you now?" If the king is going to settle accounts with you, will your Tyrell lord agree? What will the lords of the River Reach think? What will the common people of the River Reach think? You have a high reputation in the River Reach. Your daughter died tragically, and you are on the right side. Many people present can testify to this, but will the king believe it? Admit that a royal child has become a rapist. How should the king deal with this matter? How should you choose? This series of words was uncertain, but Earl Tully suddenly calmed down after hearing it, and then stared at the three red-robed figures thoughtfully, and found that the black-haired young man was also walking towards them. You want to disrupt the situation in Westeros? What is your purpose? Lord Tully heard the young man ask. The red monks did not speak, but then the young man spoke again. Who ordered you? A red monk of a higher level than you? Well, that's true. Then who ordered that person? A god? No. Then who? An ambitious ruler in the 9 free trade cities? No. Which duke in the 7 kingdoms? The Prince of Dawn? No. Could it be the remnants of the Targaryen who fled abroad? The leading red monk stared at the handsome young man squatting in front of him with horror, staring at him and saying a lot of guesses while his mouth opened and closed. Although he didn't say anything, the other party was getting closer and closer to the truth. You serve the Targaryen. He finally nodded affirmatively. But why? As far as I know, the remaining Targaryen. Wait, don't worry about this for now. Now tell me, do you have other accomplices? Chapter 211, Aftermath and Departure. After a night of raging, the storm in the Hornhill Castle seemed to have finally dissipated. Among the 4 red-robed monks who used children to carry out their conspiracy, the one who drank the potion had died suddenly, and the other 3 red-robed monks were severely punished, hung on the outer wall of the castle, and imprisoned in narrow iron cages, hoping to slowly kill them with sunlight and crows. This punishment lasts for a long time, but the deterrent effect is very strong. At least some farmers and merchants who heard the noise and ran to the outside of the castle to watch were shocked and awed. Of course, there were also those who didn't think too much and simply pointed and watched the excitement. Outsiders didn't know what happened in the castle, but the red-robed monks who were usually treated as guests by the Earl were now treated like this, which naturally caused a lot of discussion. My cousin's son is responsible for delivering cabbage to the castle. He said that those guys are a bunch of liars who only know how to eat and drink, but have no real skills. Someone said nonsense seriously, and they also molested Master Tully's maid. I said they couldn't save Master Sam. I heard that the king's brother is visiting inside. These guys must have angered him. People outside the castle came to watch the excitement and commented on it. The same was true inside the castle. Almost people in the castle continued to pay attention to this matter, either openly or secretly. Although it seems that the matter has ended, anyone who is a little smart can see that this matter has just begun. How did Renly do it? In a courtyard training ground somewhere in the castle, Mark, a thin and tall member of the Knights, couldn't help asking a question while crossing his chest and watching a fat boy in the field timidly practicing with the coach. The little monkey on his shoulder chirped a few times, unconsciously attracting the attention of the little fat man in training. As a result, he was scolded by the coach of Giling for being distracted. He always said that he could tell by observing the expression. Ignoring the noise in the training ground, the brown-haired boy Garland, wearing a leather armor, said helplessly after hearing this, slight expressions, eyes and so on. Anyway, that's what he said, but we have all tried it, but no one can tell what someone is thinking like him. There must be a secret. Mark couldn't help but say, a special technique of forcing a confession. Although it has been a night, the scene last night is still vivid in my mind. The effect of the young leader's words was very amazing. At first, the leading red-robed monk didn't say anything, but later he collapsed directly, saying whatever he was asked, without hiding anything. The scene of making someone cry with just a casual remark was very shocking, and it also made Mark excited. I want to learn this from the captain. I must learn it. It's much more interesting than raising monkeys. He said so, and the monkey on his shoulder also jumped up and down, as if agreeing. Then you go and learn it. Garland glanced at the companion who heard this. He will definitely ask you to go back and look in the mirror. What for? You will know after you look in the mirror. The brown-haired boy shrugged. The companion didn't react to what he meant for a while, but Garland didn't pay much attention to him. He turned his head and continued to watch the little fat man being trained in the training ground, but his mind was always thinking about what happened last night. The black-haired companion's confession-forcing skills were mysterious and hard to understand, but after years of contact, Garland was actually used to it, so compared to the excitement of the people around him, he put more of his mind on other things. The confession last night went very smoothly, but in fact, the red-robed monk didn't explain anything in the end, just kept claiming that this was a task assigned to them by the superiors, not their original intention. The cooperation between the higher-ups and the Targaryens was even less of their business as executors. It was hard for Garland not to notice the word Targaryen. After all, it was only a dozen years since the Targaryen dynasty came to power. But over the years, the information everyone had received was that the Targaryen bloodline had already declined, with only 2 siblings left, and they could not stir up any storms. How did they reach a cooperation with the red-robed monks now? The brown-haired boy was puzzled by this, and was a little worried about his black-haired companion. It was said that the power of the red-robed monks was very large in the free trade cities. If they really had their support, then Baratheon would definitely be in trouble. The basis for reaching a cooperation is naturally interest. Many people outside were discussing this. In a quiet study in the castle, Renly was also discussing this with Randyll Tarly, the owner of Hornhill. For the people of the Red God sect, preaching in Westeros is a benefit. Supporting a royal regime that is close to them, or even controlled by them, can bring a lot of convenience. At least, if this can be done, it will be much easier for them to find something. The young man's words were quite calm, and it was not possible to tell that what he said had much to do with himself. But just this alone is not enough to make those people take such a big risk to participate in this power struggle. In other words, it is impossible for a few Targaryen orphans to reach a cooperation with a religious force, because they are not strong enough and the chance of success is very low, no matter how great the benefits are. We can't understand the specific situation, but it is obvious that Targaryen has other allies that are strong enough to give the Red Monks confidence. He concluded, his eyes never leaving the face of the bald middle-aged noble sitting behind the desk. Lord Tully, what do you think? Poison is a trick played by women and eunuchs. The middle-aged noble snorted coldly when he heard this. They actually want to use my daughter, a little girl who is less than 10 years old. You ask me what I think? He didn't say it clearly, but picked up a two-handed sword with a scabbard leaning next to the chair and placed it on the table with a thud. This sword is called Broken Heart. It has been passed down in the Tully family for more than 500 years. It has killed countless enemies. It doesn't matter if there are a few more Targaryens. Renly smiled when he heard this, silently feeling the emotions transmitted from the other party, and he suddenly said, the Red Monks claimed that they had no accomplices near the Hornhill, but another group of people designed to lead our knights out of Highgarden. So I guess this is another collaborator of Thiz, or another group of cooperative forces. I'll send someone to investigate. Lord Tully said without hesitation. The Red Monks belong to the organization of the Old Disciples, and those disciples may be in the same group with them. Renly added, and the disciples are all over the 7 kingdoms. I will send troops to hunt down those in the territory, Lord Tully said, and suddenly paused. What does Lord Renly mean? We don't know when they reached a cooperation with the Targaryens, but those disciples have been active in Westeros for nearly 10 years. Renly said, what have they done? Lord Tully frowned when he heard this, and Renly stood up from his chair and said meaningfully, I'm going to set off immediately to visit the lords of the various places in the River Bay. They may be eager to know this news. The middle-aged nobleman looked at Renly deeply when he heard this, and then stood up suddenly. I'm with you. Thank you to book friends Hephaestus and MOM for the reward of 1000 yuan, and thank you to book friends Xianatang 246, and for the reward of 100 yuan in addition. I found some problems in the next chapter, and need to revise it, so I have to wait a while before it can be published. If you can't wait, you can read it together with the 3rd chapter in the evening. Chapter 212, Letter from the Riverbend. On the morning of the 3rd day after the incident at Hornhill, a team of 100 knights suddenly filed out of the castle and headed for Rivendell, the nearest city to Hornhill. The leader was Lord Randyll Tarly of Hornhill, but all the members of the Knights of the Silver Hand followed him. The group traveled lightly and arrived at their destination in a few days. After staying in Rivendell for a day, the team set out again, but compared to before, there was one more Lord Levy from Rivendell. Then there was a continuous journey, and the whole team kept visiting the families of the Lords of the Bay, including the Peak family of Star Shuttle, the Fossoway family of Sea Idea Hall, the Rowan family of Golden Tree, the Oakett family of Ancient Oak, and the Florent family of Brightwater. Young people nowadays are really amazing. Standing on the city wall, looking at the mighty team of knights heading towards Old Town, a thin silver-haired old man raised his hand and wiped the non-existent cold sweat from his forehead. My niece married his second brother anyway, how could she have ulterior motives? Alas, someone from the Tyrrell family must have said something bad about us. Having said that, the old man couldn't help but shudder, with a faint sense of awe in his heart. It was just a preliminary contact with some people, but they were seen before anything happened. What's wrong with the young duke's eyes? Father, what should we do now? Someone asked. Uncle went with them. There won't be any accidents, right? What accidents can there be? Our Florent family is loyal to the Iron Throne. The silver-haired old man waved his hand after hearing this. Give orders to capture all Targaryen traitors in the territory, and don't indulge those bandits anymore. They can't bring us any benefits now, they will only cause trouble. As he said that, he suddenly had an idea and asked another question. By the way, haven't you heard that Lord Renly is engaged to anyone? No, father. His son shook his head beside him. Then, the silver-haired old man opened his mouth, but after thinking carefully about the situation of several female junior members in the family, he sighed in disappointment. Talent is scarce. It was still a hot summer in the year 294 of the Egan calendar, but a cold wind suddenly rolled up in the river bay and surged rapidly, dispelling the sultry and boredom of the climate in various places. The team that set out from Hornhill circled the river bay and walked a long circle. It took a long time, but it was also grand. Every time the team arrived at a noble castle, they would join new members, family heirs, or current heads of the family, or family representatives, after they hurried on. As they arrived at one territory after another in the river bay, the news about the collusion between the remnants of the Targaryen and the old disciples and the things that happened at Hornhill gradually spread among the noble circles. Some people were indignant about it, some people had complicated feelings about it, some people were gloomy, some people were depressed and helpless, and some people quietly started to think crookedly. But no matter what these people thought, when the team arrived at their home, they could only put on a welcoming attitude, not only to provide good food and drink, but also to face the smiling or scorching attitude of a certain young duke who came with them. His presence scared many people, but as the covert conversations went on, some of the frightened people did not hesitate to send people to join the team the next day, and were somewhat relieved. At the same time, they would immediately issue a wanted order in the territory, directly marking the old disciples who had been active here for nearly 10 years as traitors, and vowed to wipe them out. On one side is a new regime that has already established a foothold, and on the other side is a remnant royal family of the old era that has drifted overseas and barely launched an action against Westeros, but has not yet launched further plans. Although some lords hope that the families under their jurisdiction can play chess on both sides, or simply have the intention to rebel, they have to make a wise choice under the pressure of someone's general situation. However, someone's purpose is not just this. After the whole team circled the Reach and visited the major families of the Reach, a letter written by Renly himself and signed by other families was sent to the Red Keep in King's Landing by Raven. At this time, the people in King's Landing were not unaware of any clues, or in other words, they have been observing the whereabouts of the Targaryen remnant outside Westeros for some time. Because according to the spies, several rulers in the free trade cities seem to have contact with the remnants of the previous dynasty, including Bravos and Volantis, including Norvis and Koha. Bravos and Volantis are the two most powerful cities in the free trade cities, and the other two are also strong, not to mention that there may be some situations that they don't know. All this made His Majesty the King on the Iron Throne a little restless, and recently he has been visiting the Royal Conference Hall one after another, keeping a close eye on it. I said I would send assassins to completely eliminate the two remnants, but you insisted on stopping me, John. What do you say now? Think of a way. King Robert's angry questioning echoed in the vast hall. Facing this, the silver-haired old man sitting in the prime minister's seat pursed his lips and remained silent, his expression gloomy. Assassinating a child is a stain on a king, your majesty, and it will damage your honor. Barristan Selmy, the captain of the King's Guard, said something, which caused King Robert to curse. Fuck honor, how many of us will die for this shitty honor? Barristan, tell me, how many lives is the shitty honor you mentioned worth? Those people might even laugh at me for being a fool. I allowed them to grow in power and still talked about honor. 7 levels of hell. I shouldn't have believed you in the first place. Maybe the situation is not that bad yet, your majesty. Duke Mace Tyrrell, the newly promoted Minister of Finance who had been in office for less than 2 years, comforted him at this time. We just heard that the Targaryens have connections with the rulers of those city-states, but having connections does not mean that they have formed an alliance. That's right, your majesty. Grand Maester Pycelle, with a rosy face, spoke slowly at this time. The 9 free trade cities have grudges against each other. For example, there is no possibility of cooperation between Bravos and Volantis. Your majesty, Bravos is against slavery. In addition, Lies, Mir and Tirosh have been fighting for that disputed land over the years. He didn't finish his words, because a follower suddenly appeared from the back door of the royal meeting hall. After receiving the signal, he ran over and handed a letter to Grand Maester Pycelle. The old man with a long white beard spread out the letter and read it for a few times, and his expression became very strange. What bad thing happened again? King Robert asked with a sneer. After 9 years, he has grown from a strong young man to a middle-aged fat man with a round belly, but he is still very intimidating when angry. Grand Maester Pycelle did not dare to neglect it and hurriedly replied, "It's news from the Lineage, your majesty, about Lord Renly." As the old man spoke, he looked at the brown-haired fat man sitting on the other side of the long table with a strange look in his eyes. He didn't continue, but stood up and handed the letter in his hand to King Robert. The person involved, Duke Mace, was a little surprised by this. He knew what the adopted brother had done in the Lineage recently. After all, the movement was quite big, and as the Lord of the Lineage, he couldn't be unaware of it. He even mentioned this matter at the royal conference table not long ago. Regarding those red-robed monks and those traitors, His Majesty has sent ravens to inform the lords of the 7 kingdoms to investigate. But this is basically it. What else can change? Duke Mace was very puzzled, and then King Robert laughed at him, which made his heart tremble, and his mood became a little uneasy. Without keeping him waiting, King Robert pushed the letter over, so Duke Mace, who had become fat over the years, took it and read it carefully. His face unconsciously became a little gloomy. The content of the letter was very simple. The major families of the River Bay testified that those old disciples were indeed traitors, and at the same time expressed their determination to clear out all the Targaryen spies in the territory. In addition, the uniform documents were also printed with familiar seals, such as Hightower, Rowan, Tully, Fossaway, Oakhead. The dense seals made the Duke of Mace a little angry, but then he thought about it, and suddenly figured something out. He stood up decisively, took off a seal ring on his hand, and stamped it on the letter, so a rose emblem appeared on the long scroll letter. He then handed the letter back to the first King Robert with both hands, and loudly declared, "The Reach is determined to clear out all Targaryen spies. Your Majesty, please rest assured that we will not let anyone go. Thank you Kangshan Fuchs, who is a white-haired book friend, for the 6,000 reward. There will be another chapter in the evening." Chapter 213, Turmoil and Ending. The end of the year 294 of the Conquest era was much more chaotic than the rest of the year. As flocks of ravens flew from the Red Keep in King's Landing to various parts of the 7 kingdoms, a hunt for the old disciples was launched in Westeros, the Vale, the Westerlands, the Riverlands, the Reach, the North. In 10 years, the figures of the foreign old disciples were everywhere in Westeros. Most lords did not like these people, but many of them treated them as guests of honor. It was not because these people could perform any magic. In fact, most of the disciples were ordinary people. They might be able to do many tricks through some potions and alchemical synthetic powders, but it was very rare to say that they really had magical abilities. However, these people were generally knowledgeable and full of exotic style. At the same time, they also had insights and abilities in medical treatment that were different from the bachelor class. Except for the old gate they mentioned, which seemed mysterious, there was nothing offensive about other aspects. In other words, whether they were welcomed or not, the disciples had already established a firm foothold in Westeros. However, with the order from King's Landing, the initially stable old disciples class became a street rat. Fleeing, hiding, camouflaging, being arrested, hanged, beheaded, tortured for clues. Blood and death began to appear frequently in all parts of the Seven Kingdoms, but apart from the Reach, which was coerced by Renly, the Stormlands, and the Royal Territory, the lords of other territories in the Seven Kingdoms were not too eager to hunt down this group of people, because it would not bring any benefits to the local lords, but the king's order had to be carried out on the surface, and appropriate blood would help increase the deterrence of the lords. However, no matter how it was implemented, at least, after the hunting and killing operation throughout Westeros began, the group of old disciples could no longer be active in the Seven Kingdoms in public, and even their activities in secret had to be cautious. Some people were very angry about this, because they suffered heavy losses in personnel and their plans were completely disrupted. Some people were also very upset about this, because groups like the old disciples were not actually a real whole, and included several religious factions. And the one who really cooperated with Targaryen was just one of them. Those people can't leave the western continent. The local lords strictly control the ports in various places. Only a few of them show goodwill to allow them to board the ship and leave. Miss Bonero, the supreme priest of the Red God Church, sent a letter, hoping that we can negotiate with the Iron Throne of the Western Continent. They can't bear the loss of a large number of people. Outside Westeros, in a bright and fragrant garden, a thin middle-aged man dressed as a butler was standing respectfully behind a little girl and reporting the news that had just come. The tire marks on his face proved that he was once a slave, but now he seemed to be in an important position. It's not smart to jump out at this time. The little girl in a warm yellow dress was squatting in front of a rose bush and touching the flowers. After hearing this, she said without looking back, the reply said that we can't do anything. Will this make Bonero dissatisfied? The butler asked in a low voice. Obviously, he was facing a little guy about 10 years old, but his attitude at this time was very respectful. Let him be dissatisfied. The girl snorted and replied, who can we blame if our own people are unreliable? What about the plan for the Western Continent? I plan to contact the people of the House of Black and White. If they can take action, it will not be so troublesome. But this will take some time. Is there any news from Dawn? The girl who was stroking the flowers turned her head and looked at the butler at the end. In the sunlight, her delicate face with a little baby fat was full of childishness, but her expression was as serious as a little adult, which was a little funny at first glance. But the butler did not dare to laugh, but answered honestly, no, Prince Doran is very cautious and has not contacted us. Cunning Dornish people. After all, little Viserys is his daughter's fiancé, and he has not cared about it for so many years. The girl curled her lips, seeming to be a little dissatisfied with this, but after thinking about it, she suddenly changed the subject. That Renly, how did you get on with your inquiries? She had carefully learned about the person involved when she made the plan, but she didn't expect to fail at the first step because of this person. This made her very upset. She felt that she didn't take the people of this era seriously and underestimated the enemy. It's still the same news as before. The butler answered carefully, it's difficult to get information about him in Highgarden. We only know that he was kidnapped, but we don't know the specific details. He is an interesting opponent. The little girl said thoughtfully. For some reason, she always felt that the name was a little familiar, but when she thought about it carefully, she couldn't think of where she had heard it before. Sister Rhaenys. A cheerful greeting interrupted the girl's meditation. Looking up, a silver-haired girl in a white thin silk dress was trotting towards her with her skirt lifted up. Seeing this, the butler bowed and left, and the girl glared at the person who ran over with dissatisfaction. How many times have I told you, Dany, to call me Sister Rhaenys? I will leave Sam to you, Lord Renly. Still at the foot of Hornhill Castle, but more than 2 months have passed. After a long journey, the knights returned to the starting point, Hornhill, to rest for 2 days. Now they are officially preparing to set off to Highgarden, because in a few days it will be the 66th name day of Olenna Redwyne, Renly's adoptive mother. A short period of time has changed a lot of things. Renly, who has lived in the Reach for more than 10 years, has changed his past low-key style, and has completely made a name for himself in the Reach. It is unknown how the lords discuss this matter secretly. On the surface, they are very polite to Renly, and even very enthusiastic. When they leave, they invite Renly to be their guest, but he politely refuses in the name of his adoptive mother's birthday. As the partner of this operation, Lord Randyll Tarly of Hornhill also values the young and handsome black-haired knight in front of him, who smiles like spring breeze, and is very likable. If Sam is not honest, you can beat him. The bold nobleman on horseback said to Renly, who was riding beside him, "You can discipline him as you like, just don't beat him to death. It won't be that exaggerated, Lord Tarly, and facts have proved that corporal punishment cannot fundamentally solve Sam's problem." Renly smiled and said, "But I will return to Dragonstone soon, and it will not be easy for Lord Tarly to see his son. His mother will miss him." The bold nobleman couldn't help turning his head to look at the fat boy riding a pony, and shrinking his head around the knights behind him, and his brows tightened subconsciously. He is the only heir of the Tarly family. I urgently need him to change. If he keeps on like this. The middle-aged noble didn't say anything else, but the emotion he conveyed was quite cold, as if he didn't have much affection for this son. Renly didn't care about it. He had been talking about this for a long time these days, and he was already familiar with this. "I will do my best to train him. If it works, I will write to Lord Tarly." "Thank you, Lord Renly." Lord Tarly nodded. "I will also help keep a close eye on those lords." Renly thanked him politely. After a long journey, the lords of the Reach have made a clear statement of their position in the face of the possible turmoil in the future. Although this cannot completely turn the Reach into a staunch supporter of Baratheon, it has stabilized the situation here, and will not be easily infiltrated. Renly believes that, if the Targaryen really makes a comeback in the future, then unless the war situation is obviously one-sided against Baratheon, it is unlikely that the Lords of the Reach will have other thoughts. And if it is really one-sided, then one more each is not much. Renly was basically satisfied with this result, but if it weren't for the initial support of Lord Tully, this matter would not have been so smooth. So Renly thought about it, and agreed directly to Randyll Tully's wish for his son to be his squire. A few years ago, when he attended his second brother Stannis' wedding, he and gallant Earl of Highgarden were knighted by Stannis, but he never took anyone as a squire after that, because he had no shortage of people to help him put on armor and take care of horses. However, he didn't feel any trouble in taking in a younger brother now. I just don't know if this little fat guy has the aura of a protagonist. After all, he is the one who survived to the end of the show. He got promoted, made money, and had a wife. It's really a high configuration. The secret murmur did not affect the superficial courtesy. After seeing him off for a long time outside Hornhill, Lord Randyll Tully finally rode back to the castle, and Renly led the members of the knights to rush towards Highgarden. Because of the extra burden in the team, they were not traveling very fast, but the distance between the two places was not far, and they finally returned to Highgarden after 5 days. When they rode into the castle, countless eyes were fixed on them, but before they could gain a firm foothold, someone came to inform Renly that the mother of the Duke of Mace, Renly's adoptive mother, Olenna Redwyne, wanted to see him immediately. Chapter 214 Secret Negotiations. As soon as he returned to Highgarden, he was called to an elegant rose garden. Renly originally thought that there might be something urgent, but when he saw his adoptive mother, he found that she was sitting in the garden pavilion, fanning herself leisurely with a satin fan, and the brown-haired Marguerite was leaning beside her. She didn't look anxious at all. Renly stepped forward, and the old man in a dark green robe looked over, and the little girl next to her was the first to greet him. "Renly, I heard that you were almost drugged." The black-haired young man couldn't help but glare at the naughty little girl, and the old man also fanned her back of the head with a fan. "Be polite, Marguerite, don't speak like a jester, and make people laugh." The little girl stuck out her tongue, and the old man then looked at Renly, and after he came forward to greet him, he motioned for him to sit opposite her. when you first came to Highgarden, you were a short and thin boy, like a girl. I heard that you were weak and sickly. I was afraid that you would die here and get into trouble. I never thought you would look like this now." After sitting down, Renly heard the old lady say this. It was a pun, obviously referring to the things that happened in the river bend before. He smiled at this and seemed a little shy, while the little girl next to the old woman had a curious expression. "Do you look like a little girl? Don't interrupt when adults are talking." The old woman patted her granddaughter with a fan again. "You don't look like a lady at all. I think you are just a chirping hen, grandmother." The girl pursed her lips to express her dissatisfaction, but got no response, so she made a face and stopped talking in a sullen manner. "What do you think of Highgarden, Renly?" The old woman then focused her attention on the black-haired young man opposite. Time has made this old lady, known as the Queen of Thorns, look even thinner. Her hair has turned silver, and her fingers holding the fan are thin and withered. Her teeth have long since fallen out, but she still looks energetic when she sits there, and she doesn't show any weakness when she speaks. In a sense, this old lady is the actual helmsman of Highgarden, the most beautiful castle in the 7 kingdoms. Renly replied. "What about the people in Highgarden?" "People?" Renly thought for a moment and said, "Willis is gentle and polite, and a very reliable friend. Lady Ellery is strict and responsible, and I'm grateful for her teaching me since I was a child. As for you, I was very scared when I first came here, because they all said that you are difficult to deal with, but now I think it is obviously not wise to believe some rumors outside." His last sentence was not entirely a compliment. In fact, although it was a relationship between an adopted son and an adopted mother, Renly had not spoken much to this person over the years, let alone been troubled. He could feel that the old lady did not value his existence, and naturally would not go up to her to get close to her. The girl suddenly called him over and made a heart-to-heart gesture, obviously influenced by the previous incident. "What about me, Renly?" The little girl who had just kept silent for a while asked with a blink of her eyes, not paying attention to the sidelong glance from her grandmother. Renly looked at her and replied with a smile, "You were ugly when you were a child, but now you are much more pleasing to the eye, but you are too cunning. Don't lie, I'm so beautiful, how could I be ugly when I was a child?" The little girl completely ignored the latter sentence and puffed up her face to express her dissatisfaction. Renly ignored her and started chatting with the cheap foster mother in front of him again. They talked about the people in Highgarden, the Duke of Mace who was far away in King's Landing, Renly's past life in Highgarden, and some trivial homely things. The old woman known as the Queen of Thorns has never been a patient person, but at this moment she seemed to be full of desire to talk. "What are your plans after returning to Dragonstone?" she asked suddenly. "First, I will get familiar with what the Lord needs to do for a while," Renly replied. "Then maybe I will go to King's Landing. My brother wrote to me before and asked me to serve in King's Landing, but I don't know the details yet." This is the truth. Robert did write to him and asked Renly to go to King's Landing to help him. Renly did not refuse this. In his heart, he did not want to get involved in any secular affairs, but the situation is no longer the same as before. Targaryen is obviously making a comeback, which is completely different from what he remembers. It is very inappropriate to stay out of it at this time. The people of the Targaryen family are either crazy or monsters. It will not end well if you follow them, the old man said with disdain, probably guessing what he was thinking. This woman has never liked Targaryen very much, probably because of a Targaryen fiancé when she was a child. It is said that her former fiancé was a homosexual and died in battle with his lover. Dragonstone is nothing to stay at. There used to be dragons to see, but now it's just a pile of rotten rocks. I think you might as well go to King's Landing, the old lady said, and seeing Renly smiling but not answering, she changed the subject. "Mr. Lomis told me that you are familiar with history books." "I have read some," Renly answered. "What do you think of Viserys II?" "Viserys II?" Renly was stunned when he heard this. Viserys II was the Targaryen king after Baelor, or Saint Baelor as the people called him. He was also the father of the incompetent King Aegon, who Renly used to remind Robert. "Why are you mentioning this person for no reason?" Renly had this doubt in his mind, but then he reacted. After a moment of silence, He replied, Viserys II served 3 generations of Targaryen kings, and served as the king's hand for more than 10 years. When the young dragon King Daeron was busy conquering Dawn, he was able to stabilize the situation in the rear. When Saint Bela ignored state affairs and focused on praying, he was also able to take charge of the overall situation on behalf of the king. In general, Viserys II was an excellent king, and his ability to govern the country was one of the best among the Targaryen kings, but he died too early. His words sounded insignificant, but then the pavilion suddenly became a little cold. The atmosphere was silent for a moment, and the old man finally looked at Renly deeply, and never asked about history or anything like that again. Instead, after chatting about family matters for a while, he waved his hand to signal Renly to go and do his own thing. Renly stood up and saluted without hesitation and left. Viserys II was one of the most capable kings among the Targaryen kings, but his coronation was quite controversial. It was rumored that he sat on the Iron Throne after killing his nephew. The old lady mentioned this person specifically and brought the little girl Margaery with her. It was obvious what she was hinting at, but Renly had no interest in this. Viserys II was smart and capable, but he died suddenly after sitting on the Iron Throne for only 1 year. There were also rumors among the people that he was poisoned by his heir, his eldest son, King Aegon. Those who kill their relatives will eventually receive the same retribution, and Renly has already given an answer. Chapter 215, Letter from Dragonstone. There were no other unexpected events in the 2 days after that conversation. As the name day of the cheap foster mother approached, the High Court became more and more lively. In Renly's opinion, the so-called name day is actually similar to the birthday. There are some subtle differences, but the form is basically the same. A banquet is held, and all friends are welcome to visit and bless. However, in the continent of Westeros, if it is 77 or 70, it may be more grand, but there is no custom of 66 birthdays here. So although the High Court has become more and more lively recently, there are not many people with high status who come to participate in the celebration. Most of them are some small nobles who come from nearby for convenience. The relationship between the feudal lord and the vassal is like that between the king and the vassal. The vassal may be respectful to the king and obey the orders, but it is not necessary to curry favor with him everywhere. Even in Westeros, there are many people who secretly want to overthrow the feudal lord and take the throne themselves. In fact, in the River Bay alone, the Tyrell feudal family is not the strongest one, and the direct territory is not the largest. In Renly's opinion, the strongest family in the Riverage is the Hightower family of Old Town. Apart from other things, the headquarters of the Citadel and the church are in that city, and the territory is very large. It is simply a hidden boss in Westeros. It's just that they are low-key, don't seem to have much ambition for power, and never steal the limelight from the Tyrell family. The approaching birthday party made the atmosphere in the castle strong. The servants' busy figures did not hinder the nobles from chatting with each other. During this period, Renly was hiding, but there were always people who came to talk to him. There were some nobles who were familiar to him, but there were also many strangers. Although Renly wandered around the Riverreach a while ago, he only visited some of the main nobles in the Riverreach. He didn't care about the small nobles at all. However, the situation about this matter has obviously spread throughout the Riverreach, so Renly can clearly feel that many of the visitors are in awe or curious about him. The Duke of Mace was not in the castle, so with the help of Lady Ellery, the High Garden heir Willis personally organized the celebration banquet. Although he had difficulty walking, his humble and courteous demeanor still won the recognition of many of his father's vassals and knights. His 2 younger brothers, Garlan and Loras, followed to entertain some nobles of the same age, and they were busy and could hardly be seen. For a while, Renly was quite leisurely. Apart from exchanging a few words with a small number of visitors, he spent most of his time preparing for his departure from Highgarden. The main thing was to plan the route. Highgarden was very far away from Dragonstone, and there were countless roads crossing and crisscrossing in between. How to take the right route was a problem that had to be considered. However, just as he was in the room and carefully pondering the sheepskin map, the little girl Margaery suddenly came to the door. "Grandma told me not to come to see you again." After opening the door and putting the little girl into the room, she said to Renly sadly, with an aggrieved expression, and her already moist brown eyes were even more crystal clear at this time. "Why?" Renly was stunned when he heard this. "Grandma said you rejected her." The little girl said sadly, "Why did you reject her?" This question was not easy to answer, so Renly denied it. "How could I reject you? You were there at the time, didn't you hear it? But I didn't understand. Your grandmother fooled you." Renly replied with a smile and raised his hand to pinch her little nose. "Besides, why are you crying? It's none of your business whether I refuse or not. Grandma told me not to come to see you again." The little girl replied aggrievedly, lowering her head, and her soft brown long hair seemed a little messy. "Then why are you here now?" Marguerite was stunned when she heard this, and then blinked. "I forgot." Renly was speechless, so he patted her forehead and said, "Now that you remember, go back quickly. If your grandmother finds out, you will be scolded." "I won't go back," the girl said. Her day-like eyes became crystal clear and moist again, and her nose began to twitch. "Grandmother is unreasonable. Why should I listen to her? If you don't listen to her, who else can you listen to?" Renly said, "And you are so old. Why are you always crying? You are leaving, and you don't allow me to cry." She raised her sleeves to wipe her tears while speaking. "Willis said that we won't see you for several years." Renly didn't say anything after hearing this. Although he had some conflicts with his cheap adoptive mother not long ago, this did not affect his feelings about Highgarden. After a long time, he had long been accustomed to the people and everything here, and now he is about to leave, and he also has many reluctances. This era is not like modern society, where you can communicate with relatives and friends anytime and anywhere by making a phone call or sending a text message. For the people of Westeros, parting means a long separation, and it is even very likely that they will never see each other again in their lifetime. Of course, their current situation is not so exaggerated, but at least, the person who has grown up with them is suddenly leaving, and they will not see each other for many years. No matter how optimistic and cunning the little girl is, she can't remain indifferent. "You can write a letter," Renly suggested. "Write to Dragonstone or King's Landing. Raven communication is not so convenient, and it is expensive, but at least it is a way." "I don't like writing." The little girl pouted when she heard it. "Forget it." Renly rolled his eyes and stood up to continue his work. The other party sniffed when he saw this. "I will miss you, Renly. Can you sing a song for me before you leave?" "No problem." The little girl's face was happy when she heard it, and then she began to wait quietly. However, after staring at the black-haired young man scribbling on the map on the table for a long time, she didn't see any movement from him, so she couldn't help but remind him. "Why don't you sing?" "I haven't left yet." Renly looked back at her in surprise. "Why are you in such a hurry? Why don't you sing now?" "No." "Sing one, Renly. They can't sing as well as you." The girl looked up and blinked with expectation, and her expression when she was acting coquettish was particularly interesting, but Renly didn't buy it. Instead, he raised his hand and rubbed her smooth brown hair with a few small braids, so that the little girl was instantly defeated. "Oh, you are so annoying." She hurriedly protected her forehead and stepped back. "My hair is hard to comb. If you say it's not possible, don't think about it." Renly replied with a sneer, turned around and continued to do his own thing, not intending to pay attention to this cunning kid. Maybe the little girl was really sad at first, but later she was just acting. There was nothing wrong with her purpose, but this attitude must be hit. "Stingy." The dissatisfied voice of the girl came from behind. Renly ignored her, and the child yelled a few more times. When she got no response, she snorted and left angrily. "I won't miss you, and I won't write to you after you leave." Hearing the door slamming behind him, Renly laughed dumbly, then rolled up the map with the route outlined and put it in the desk drawer. He turned around and was about to check his other luggage when another child suddenly came to the door. "Sir." This time it was a little fat boy who came in. He had a round face and black hair. His short legs and round body made him look like a big bull with limbs. Facing Renly's gaze, the little fat boy couldn't help but shrink his neck, lowered his head and said timidly, your letter." As he spoke, he handed over a rolled up sheepskin letter with his chubby little hands, and his trembling arms seemed extremely nervous. No wonder that Randolph Tully was angry, Renly thought. This boy named Samuel is surprisingly timid. He has been brought back for several days. He has been in contact with him many times, such as dressing, running errands, and even emptying the urinal. But this guy is still so shy. It's really. The sigh in his heart did not affect him to take the letter. After reading it, Renly couldn't help but frown. The letter was signed by Cans, a maester belonging to the territory of Dragonstone. The letter was about a vassal under Renly, who was attacked in a place called Crabclaw Peninsula. Over the years, this maester named Cans wrote letters every once in a while to report on Dragonstone, but most of them were boring things that Renly thought. Only in the last letter did he mention the Crabclaw Peninsula. Crabclaw Peninsula is a very special place, close to the bay where Dragonstone is located. In theory, it belongs to Renly's vassal, the Celtiga family of Crab Island. But in fact, they have always been undisciplined. In other words, before the Baratheon dynasty, the Crabclaw Peninsula was actually a direct vassal of the Targaryen family. They were loyal to Targaryen and even claimed to be model subjects of the Dragon family. After Targaryen failed, the peninsula was awarded to the Celtiga family, but the people of the peninsula refused to pay taxes. Because it was so poor and full of swamps, it had no value. The royal family was too lazy to pay attention to such things and just asked the people of the Celtiga family to solve it themselves. As a result, they have not collected any taxes from there until now. Renly didn't care whether to collect taxes or not, because it had been like this for more than 10 years, but now the people of the Crabclaw Peninsula dared to attack, which made him have to worry. Even if Targaryen showed signs of recovery, it hasn't recovered yet, right? Those model subjects wouldn't be so direct, right? Who gave them such courage? Feeling that there might be something hidden in this matter, Renly thought about it and put away the letter. Then he patted the shoulder of the fat boy who had been standing cautiously in front of him, causing him to jump with fear. Be prepared. Renly ignored the coward's expression and said, as soon as the banquet is over tomorrow, we will set off for Dragonstone immediately. Chapter 216 Banquet and Farewell. The banquet was very lively, with jugglers and fat jesters performing magic and acrobatics in turn, and singers and bards singing. The Reach was the palace of art in the Seven Kingdoms, and Highgarden Castle was the center of this palace. The Tyrell family kept a large number of bards, who usually played and sang quietly in various places in the castle, and sometimes they would gather together to play together. However, even though there were many top players in the Seven Kingdoms and the music they played and sang was generally beautiful and moving, when an ancient song praising the Tyrell family sounded leisurely, their previous performances were still eclipsed. The song was called Golden Rose, and most bards in the Seven Kingdoms could sing it, because the bard's favorite place was the Reach, and this song was a song praising the Tyrell family, the Lord of the Reach. Obviously, this is not a new song. The lyrics describing a rose growing vigorously from a tender bud and blooming with gorgeous charm are also familiar to many nobles participating in the banquet. However, when the steady and magnetic voice sang this ballad, it still attracted the attention of everyone in the banquet hall. The reason is not only the noble status of the singer, but more importantly, the song echoing in the hall sounds very moving. It is not just a good voice, but there is a special charm in this song that attracts the soul to follow the song. With the melodious song, people's emotions are more and more agitated. In a trance, it seems that an inconspicuous rose in the flowers suddenly blooms at a certain moment, and the flowers are dwarfed by it. The white and gorgeous hall was originally quite lively, but with the sound of this song, all the chaotic sounds disappeared directly. Everyone listened quietly, with more or less intoxicated gestures on their faces. Only after the short singing ended, did they all get out of that unique state, some sighing with loss, some still immersed in the afterglow of the song with joy, some staring at the tall figure in the center of the hall holding a wooden harp, and bowing with fiery eyes, and some clapping and cheering enthusiastically to express their love. I lost the bet last time, otherwise I would have heard Renly sing the song The Wife of Dawn. In the thunderous applause of the hall, the brown-haired boy Garland in the crowd said to his companions with some regret, just imagining it is very exciting. The Wife of Dawn is nothing. I hope he sings the song William's Wife is Wet. Mark, who raises monkeys, sighed, but he will definitely not sing it. Renly is too serious. He said he will leave tomorrow. Let's get him drunk tonight. Garland suggested in a low voice. Get him drunk. I don't believe he can still be serious. Isn't this a bit bad? Mark hesitated after hearing this. What's wrong with that? Listen to me. Let's do this. Lord Renly's singing is just amazing. The two guys over there had bad intentions, and a few little girls here gathered together and chattered. I wish I could sing such a moving song like an adult someday. Come on, Yalan. Sooner or later you'll be able to do it. I hope so, but it's a pity that the adult is leaving, and we can't ask him for advice anymore. Alas, why is he leaving? I don't know. Let's go and talk to him, and ask him to leave later. Let's not do that. Lord Renly must be busy with something. The little girls chattered innocently, but after talking for a long time, they found that someone who was usually the most active had been pursing her lips and looked sulky, and they couldn't help but be surprised. Marguerite, why don't you speak? A chubby little girl blinked and asked, are you in a bad mood? I don't want to discuss the song of that stingy guy. The other party replied in a muffled voice. He promised to sing a song before I left, but he sang it at the banquet. What's this? Why can't he sing at the banquet? The fat girl was confused when she heard this, and the other two girls here were also confused. I said I promised to give you a gift, but I gave this gift to everyone. Would you be happy? The girls understood what he said, and after looking at each other, one of them curled her lips and said, you are so stingy, Marguerite. That's right, you actually dislike us for sharing your gift? We have shared gifts with you before, haven't we? Aren't we friends, Marguerite? How can this be considered stingy? And do you understand? The little girl was even more depressed when she was accused by her companions. The banquet held by High Court was not a sitting and sitting feast. At this time, the noblemen and women in the White Hall were moving freely. After Renly finished playing, a dwarf circus took over the center of the vast hall and performed hard, attracting most people's attention. Some people came up to talk to Renly, many of whom were noble ladies from the River Bay, but when the silver-haired Duchess appeared, these evil-minded guys left tactfully. Are you sure you don't need a mister to follow you on the way? Time has added some wrinkles to Lady Ellery's face, who was wearing a gorgeous dress, but her rigorous character has not changed at all. Not long ago, when Renly told her that he would leave tomorrow, she took the initiative to start making arrangements. The journey is too long. If you get sick, it will be difficult to find a mister to treat you on the way. I will pay more attention to this. Renly replied softly. He respected the Duchess in front of him very much, because his adoptive mother was more like this one than the cunning old lady. Etiquette teaching, food, clothing, housing and transportation. 10 years of life were all taken care of by Lady Ellery, and her attitude towards Renly was the same as her son's, without any faults to be found. There will be many castles along the way. If you really get sick, you can stop and get treatment nearby. That's not very convenient. Maybe it's too late. It's okay. I know my limits. Renly replied. Seeing this, the other party sighed and said, okay, since you insist. Then Lady Ellery gave many more instructions, including some matters that need to be paid attention to on the road, including the arrangement of the accompanying personnel, including clothing and food. Then her eldest son Willis also came to Renly. In comparison, he didn't say so much. He just claimed that he would keep in touch with Renly by Raven, and that the Knights of the Silver Hand would not disband. In fact, Renly had the best relationship with Willis in Highgarden, but they didn't think the separation was that serious, so although they were disappointed, they would not be too sentimental. After that, the members of the Knights in Highgarden also came up to talk to him, including the lively Garland, the humorous Mark, the rather dull Zenford, and the reserve member of the Knights, Willis' youngest brother Loras. Compared to his two elder brothers, Loras, the little gay who had a close relationship with Renly in his memory, was really young. His appearance of being in his teens made it impossible for him to blend into the circle of adults for the time being, but he admired Renly very much, and was very active in joining the circle of brothers. Unfortunately, when the birthday dinner was over, the farewell banquet held by the Knights for Renly directly excluded him. The reason was very simple. He was young, and was not allowed to drink. The long banquet lasted until the second half of the night, and one glass of wine after another was poured into his stomach. Relying on his extraordinary physique, Renly's alcohol tolerance was bottomless, and he had basically never been drunk since he was a child. Relatively speaking, the others were not so lucky. They drank so much that they were dizzy and lost their way. When Renly left Highgarden the next day, those people had not even gotten up yet, which somewhat dispelled some of the sadness of parting. After bidding farewell to the familiar faces in Highgarden, the team of dozens of people set off on the road. The continuous sound of horse hooves and wheels was heard. The white castle behind them slowly shrank, and finally seemed out of reach like the stars in the sky. However, the road ahead gradually became wider and more complicated as they moved forward. However, on the third day of the team's journey, when they set up camp in the wild, an unexpected person quietly visited, Maegor Targaryen. Thank you to book friend Sagasmakis for the reward of 1000, and thank you to book friend Zyanatang 246 for the reward of 100 in addition. According to the last statistics, I still owe 14 chapters, but the monthly ticket has increased by 1 chapter recently, so I still owe 15 chapters. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 217 Active Surrender. After many years, when Renly saw this special person Maegor again, he found that he had matured a lot. He was wrapped in a black cloak that was convenient for night travel. His short silver hair, slightly rough face, and unclear body shape made him look like a mature young man, or he had just stepped into the ranks of middle-aged people. Only by careful observation can you find some unique feminine beauty on his face. It was us who led you out of Highgarden. The night was dim, but there were several fires in the camp, and the dim light was shrouded. There were many soldiers around who stared at this sudden visitor, but because they had been ordered in advance, they did not approach to listen, but stared at the two people by the campfire, keeping alert at all times. "Is a wanted criminal yours?" Renly asked with a raised eyebrow. He didn't expect the other party's first opening remark to be surrender, but at the same time he could feel the sincerity of Maegor, which aroused a little interest in him. He hadn't gotten much information about him over the years. Although his intelligence system had been established, it was only in its initial form, floating on the surface, and he couldn't get too deep into the details. "I've gathered a lot of people from our side," Maegor replied. "We are quite powerful and secret, and it's easy for us to make some noise." "So you have reached a cooperation with Targaryen?" Renly narrowed his eyes. When he was interrogating the Red Monk, he knew that there was another group of people cooperating with his frame-up plan, but he didn't expect it to be the one in front of him. "We did reach a cooperation with Targaryen at the beginning, or they hired us to do things for them," Maegor answered frankly, "but I didn't expect that the third party cooperating with Targaryen would be those Red Monks." Renly didn't say anything after hearing this, and the other party continued to speak. "The old disciples represented by those Red Monks hunted and killed our people everywhere, and we have no possibility of cooperating with them. In other words, unless the Targaryens can give up the cooperation with the Red Monks, we will not do anything for them. But as far as I know, this seems impossible, so we must find another way out. The Red Monks, or the Red God Church behind them, have a strong influence in the free trade cities, especially in the most powerful Volantis, where there are many people who believe in the Lord of Light. Renly knows this. In contrast, the group of people represented by this person in front of him, although they have a unique origin, are just some sewer rats that can't be on the stage. "So you came to me to find another way out?" he asked with interest. "Yes, let's cooperate," Maegor said sincerely. "We can't join the Targaryens. We are enemies of the old ones. In other words, we are also enemies of the Targaryens, so our camps are the same. Don't forget that you are also a Targaryen," Renly reminded him. "But I'm not a Targaryen of the lineage of Venus," Maegor replied. "Since you are familiar with history, you should be able to understand the difference." Renly shrugged and said, "I can't provide you with any territory or power, let alone let you become king. It's useless for you to cooperate with me. He paused and then said, "And if you understand, then you will know that my territory is just Dragonston." The name of Dragonston made Meager silent for a while, but then she suddenly laughed. "You are a liar. I openly publicize my name and life experience, but most people, except those from our side, don't believe what I say. Even if they do, they won't look at me with normal eyes. People in this world won't accept a monster like me, so I have long given up on being a king. As for being a lord, we have tried, but we can't shake the current situation in Westeros with our own strength. We originally planned to use a Targaryen invasion to achieve this goal, but unfortunately this is no longer possible." "Then what do you want?" Renly raised his eyebrows and asked. "Don't want power. Do you want wealth?" "We want all those disciples to die," Meager said. "They hunt us everywhere, and there is no room for reasoning. Now they are cooperating with the Targaryens, so we can't just wait for them to come to our door." Renly pondered after hearing this. All signs indicate that these ancient people and those red monks seem to be really incompatible, so they obviously don't want to see the forces of the red monks successfully defeat the current masters of Westeros. It can even be said that these people may be in the same state as themselves and dare not leave Westeros. However, they could not achieve much in Westeros. In this case, it was inevitable to find other ways out. It was not difficult to find him. After all, they had met before. It was just that the basis of cooperation was mutual benefit, and Renly did not think that a common goal alone would make this person and the people behind her willing to be his younger brothers. Moreover, Renly also knew his current resources and status, or knew his own weight. "You want to use me to get a relationship with my brother," he said slowly. The other party looked a little embarrassed when he heard this, but he did not deny it, but nodded frankly. "Although we don't have many people, many of them have special talents and can be competent as clerks, tax collectors, knights, and even commanders of an army. But you have no identity, no one will believe you, and I'm not wrong. You are now doing banditry, which is a stain." Meager was silent when he heard this. This is their biggest weakness. Because they have no identity, they can only hang around at the bottom of society. It is too difficult to move forward. Not everyone can cheat like Renly without revealing any flaws. Even Renly can't keep up the disguise of an identity for a long time. Lies are lies after all, and there will always be flaws. If they want to survive in a legitimate way, these ancient people will basically end up in failure. The Lords of Westeros will conduct a careful investigation when hiring people, and they can't just hire anyone. So apart from being a bandit and some idle hired riders, they really don't have any other suitable job options. However, in peaceful times, being a highway bandit actually doesn't have much future. Small fights can't make much money, and it can't satisfy their appetite, but if the movement is big, it will attract encirclement and suppression. Over and over again, they have also suffered a lot of blows. This business has developed in troubled times, and Meager also believes that Westeros will inevitably fall into turmoil again in the future. Even their initial idea was to cooperate with Targaryen as a guide, and then take advantage of the purge of the old forces in Westeros to take power. However, the cooperation between Targaryen and the Red Monks directly disrupted their plan, and at the same time, they suddenly realized that they could no longer stay out of the future chaos. If they don't look further, they won't live long at all. It's not possible to hide or mix with other people because those disciples have special identification methods and can recognize the difference between them and normal people. So they had to find another way out. So Meager suddenly visited, hoping to get in touch with Renly or Baratheon behind Renly. If they can't get close to Targaryen, they can join Baratheon, right? When the war starts in the future, they will have Baratheon as a protection umbrella, and the members who are capable will always show their edge. Although this is a slow development, it is more or less a way out. But now think about it, who can trust a group of unidentified and tainted bandits without any reason? Meager felt that she was taking it for granted, but Renly's words immediately afterwards aroused her hope. "But if you can prove your worth, I can consider introducing you to my brother." "How to prove it?" Meager asked hurriedly. Renly replied, "Do you know Crabclaw Peninsula?" The next chapter will have to wait a little longer, before 12:30. Chapter 218 Dragonston. Those ancient people wanted to abandon the dark and join the light. After thinking about it, Renly believed that they did have this reason. So he was going to give these people a chance to prove themselves, asking them to go to Crabclaw Peninsula to find out the specific situation. There was this opportunity, but in fact Renly himself did not expect this to bring him any help because he did not know what the situation was in that place. He just felt that it was a little unusual, so when he saw someone approaching him, he directed the person there, which was a move that was better than nothing. As for the idle chess, Renly did not take it seriously. In his opinion, it was just a small episode. In contrast, he was more impressed by the solidity of the class system in Westeros. Facts have proved that what does it matter if you have talent or ambition? Without a corresponding background, you still cannot get on the stage. There were no more accidents on the following journey. Hills, mountains, forests, wilderness. The long journey made people feel bored, but there was always an end. Renly's customized route was to go from a road called Rose Avenue to the Royal Forest in Stormland, and then cross the forest to a place called Pointed Point. Pointed Point is the name of a castle in the territory of a lord family loyal to Renly. The Baratheon family ruled Pointed Point. The patriarch of the family held a welcome banquet for Renly's arrival, and then sent a ship to send Renly to Dragonstone across the sea. From a distance, Dragonstone was not flat, like a mountain protruding in the ocean. After slowly approaching, the mountain gradually spread out, and it was clear that there was a slightly flat rocky hilly area surrounding the mountain. It was noon at this time, but the sky was gloomy. The top of the highest mountain on the island was slowly rising with pale and grey smoke, which seemed to be connected to the dark clouds in the sky, silently revealing the fact that it was an active volcano. On the top of another hill that was slightly lower than the volcanic peak, a towering black castle came into view. The castle was made of black stone, and the thick walls covered most of the buildings. However, from the towers above the castle, one could tell that the castle was extraordinary. Several black towers were carved into the shape of giant dragons, surrounding a huge main castle with a round arch top. The battlements of the black walls on the edge were also filled with various dragon-shaped decorations. At first glance, the castle seemed to be formed by countless giant dragons. As the ship approached, the black dragon castle standing high above became clearer, and a vast rocky land and a densely built village under the castle also came into view. However, before the ship actually docked, someone on a lighthouse on the edge of the island discovered them, and they were notified in advance. Then Renly met a relative who had managed the territory for him for more than 10 years, when he was in the Reach. Andrew Esmond, a steady middle-aged man from the Esmond family, the maternal family of the 3 Baratheon brothers. In fact, Renly knew this man when he was in Storm's End. Alan has written to ask when Lord Renly will return to Dragonstone. I think he will come to visit directly after hearing the news of your arrival. The middle-aged man with a beard and thick brown eyebrows said happily after hugging Renly, which reminded Renly of the interesting fat playmate in his childhood. I'm also looking forward to seeing him again. Renly laughed and said, he still owes me a turtle feast. The two walked onto the rugged road of Dragonstone, while talking and laughing. Instead of going to the village not far away, they slowly walked towards the castle on the towering hill in the distance. The Andrew beside him was not the father of the little fat man, but his cousin. Renly still remembered that the little fat man claimed that this man often knocked on his forehead to make him stupid, and also stared at his inheritance order with ill intentions. However, in fact, this middle-aged man named Andrew was a steady and kind-hearted good man. As they walked along, this relative from the maternal family took the initiative to talk about everything in Dragonstone without Renly asking more questions. Financial situation, territory taxation, population status, several vassal families. In fact, Renly knew more or less about these, but not too detailed. Now, he had a more intuitive understanding of his territory. The territory's finances could barely fill the majestic but expensive castle on the island, but there was no way to have rich money. The population on the island was less than 1,000, and the few vassals under his command were also not strong. If a war really broke out, they could not call on many troops. At the same time, the 4 vassals under his command also have their own little thoughts. Lord Celtiger of Crab Island is greedy and stingy. He is an old sly man. Every time he comes to pay taxes, he has to cheat and play tricks. Lord Valerian of Tidehead Island guards the glory of his family in the past. He is arrogant and has no self-awareness. The Ballemon family of the Pointed Horn is very honest, but the current Lord Ballemon is a sickly person. He is always sick in a year. There is no guarantee that he will suddenly die suddenly. His only heir is also a weak and sickly fat man. It is very worrying to look at him. The only normal one is the Sangalus family of Wonder Harbor, but the current Lord Sangalus is crazy about the 7 gods. In Andrew's opinion, he is not a normal person. Renly listened to all this quietly without expressing any opinions. It can only be said that he originally had no expectations for the Dragonstone Island. Apart from the special status of this island during the Targaryen rule, the only thing that he can see here is the dragon crystal mine hidden under the volcano on the island. According to the memory of the previous life, the so-called dragon crystal is a powerful weapon to deal with the White Walkers, that is, the great disaster that will happen to this world in a few years, but before that, it seems impossible to use it to make a profit. Mr. Kans is a respectable old man, very capable and kind, but he is now treating some sick villagers at the foot of Dragon Mountain, and we haven't had time to inform him of your return. After Andrew finished talking about the situation of the vassal, he began to introduce the personnel composition in the castle, and the Dragon Mountain he mentioned was a huge active volcano on the island. Because you are away all year round, there are no butlers and coaches in the castle. Most of the servants in the castle are local residents of Dragonstone Island. The team was originally moving along the sloping upward mountain road, but a thin round-faced young man suddenly jumped out, half knelt on the ground, and wailed and cried to Renly, "My Lord Duke, you are finally back. You must take care of my father." This man had a loud voice, and the team was in a commotion. Andrew, who was interrupted, was already unhappy. Seeing this, he couldn't help but frowned, and then whispered to Renly, "He is from the Celtiga family." Renly was stunned when he heard it, and then understood. One of his vassals, Count Adrian Celtiga of Crab Island, was attacked when he went to collect taxes in person not long ago. He had not forgotten this, but the man in front of him was in this posture. There is another chapter in the afternoon. Chapter 219, Ghost Thoughts and Trivia. The round-faced young man half kneeling on the ground, kept complaining about what happened to his old father on the Crabclaw Peninsula, saying that all the guards were killed, leaving him alone to flee in panic, that the people on the Crabclaw Peninsula were simply a bunch of lunatics with no reason at all, and that this was not the first time they were attacked. The last sentence solved a puzzle that Renly had previously had, which was why the people on the Crabclaw Peninsula were so bold. He had thought there might be some special circumstances, but now it seemed that they had always been like this. What he thought in his mind did not affect his actions. Renly took the initiative to help the round-faced young man up, but the young man was crying and had no strength, and he could not get up, no matter how he helped him. So Renly simply ignored this guy and led the team around him and continued on their way. This made the other party quite dumbfounded, but he hurriedly stood up and followed him, without the weak attitude he had before. "Sir, you must do something for my father. He is not young, but he was so frightened that he is still bedridden. Those damn Crabclaw Peninsula people are too presumptuous." The towering castle was already in sight. As he approached, the outer wall seemed to be a giant dragon curling up and entwining. The castle gate was the dragon's mouth, and the gate that had been opened was the dragon's fangs. Following the fangs into the castle, a large number of black buildings came into view. Renly looked around and answered the round-faced young man's words seemingly casually. Lord Celtiga knew that sending people to collect taxes would be dangerous, so why did he go and do it himself? "My lord father thought that your imminent return would be enough to deter those barbaric people from the peninsula," the round-faced young man said indignantly. "He thought that under your protection, he would be safe and guaranteed. As a result, those people were too arrogant. They didn't care about King Robert's reputation at all, and didn't take you seriously. Did you go there on purpose?" The sudden words made the angry young man stunned, and then facing Renly's glance, he shuddered unconsciously, and said with a smile, "Go there on purpose? What do you mean, my lord?" "I mean to collect taxes. Of course we have to. The Crabclaw Peninsula is undisciplined, and taxes have not been collected for many years. Your father is a little anxious." Renly said to himself. Then when he heard that a young duke like me was about to return, he set his sights on me. The purpose is to use this incident to anger me, and then let me ask the king to solve this matter. Cold sweat quietly overflowed from his forehead. The round-faced young man obviously didn't expect that the thoughts hidden in his heart would be revealed so easily, and he was really a little flustered. However, he did not lose his composure, but said with a guilty conscience, "My lord, you are joking. How could my father joke about his own life? And you are his feudal lord. How could he do such a thing? The feudal lord has the obligation to protect the vassal, but he has no responsibility to handle the security of the territory under his command for the vassal." Renly ignored what the other party said and said casually, "Tell your father that, if he really can't handle the chaos in his own territory, then I can choose to take over the Crabclaw Peninsula." The round-faced young man naturally knew the difference between taking over and not helping to deal with it, so he laughed dryly twice, did not dare to entangle anymore, and hurriedly said goodbye and left. Renly did not care what this guy would think later, and his eyes turned back to the castle. Compared with the vassal who had evil ideas, he was more interested in this castle, because he suddenly thought that this place was the base camp of Targaryen for countless years. Would there be any copy medium in it? With this idea in mind, he did not go directly into the main hall of the castle to rest, but walked around the castle under the leadership of the acting Lord Andrew. From the outside, the castle looked like a black dragon coiled around several smaller black dragons, and the internal style characteristics were also maintained here. The mouth of the dragon is the city gate, the dragon body is the city wall, the dragon wings contain the blacksmith shop and the armory, and the dragon tail is horizontally formed into an arch, a bridge, and an outdoor staircase. There are many towers in the castle, and each tower looks like a crouching or spreading black dragon. The only difference is the main castle of the castle, the Stone Drum Tower, which is a towering cylindrical building. Looking up, there is a stone arch bridge on the top connecting the main castle with another tower in the air. On the side of the main castle, a small black dragon curled up in a corner. At this time, the nostrils of the small black dragon were constantly emitting smoke and steam. Renly walked in and found that it was a kitchen. The building standing in front of the main castle was the reception hall. It also looked like a black dragon, but it was a dragon lying on the ground. The dragon's mouth was the entrance to the hall. After walking in, the interior space was vast and full of angular exotic styles. The surface was flat and paved with black stone bricks. The black stone walls on the left and right were inlaid with tall windows. A lot of light poured in through the windows, illuminating the hall. Stepping deeper and climbing the stairs, Renly finally sat on a dragonstone-like lord's chair at the end of the hall. Then he looked down and found that, because there were rows of tall windows on both sides, this dark hall did not feel dark at all, but rather seemed quite vast and magnificent. It's a pity that there is no medium. He sighed secretly. The style of this castle is unique in Westeros. Even the torch stands that can be seen everywhere are shaped like dragon claws. The various fantastic and exaggerated shapes seem to be from a completely different world compared to the ordinary medieval fortresses. It is rumored that this castle is indeed not built with ordinary craftsmanship, but mixed with Valyrian magic. However, the majestic shape does not bring much substantial benefits. After walking around for a long time, Renly did not smell any special smell. He even found that the castle was very empty and did not see any precious items. Thinking about it, this is normal. During the war, the Targaryen family fled to this castle, and after the war, it was swept by other armies. If there were any good things in it, they would have been swept away long ago, and he, the lord who was later granted, could not even get his hands on them. Renly stopped thinking about it. After feeling the hardness of the lord's chair, he walked down, as if he had lost interest, and began to stare at the servants and soldiers who followed him to transport his gifts to the main castle residence behind the hall. These people were not Renly's personal property, but were assigned to him by the Tyrell family for use on the road. But now that they had arrived at their destination, they would return to Highgarden soon. The only people Renly brought back were a fat servant from the Tully family and a follower from a commoner family. Top. I will continue to assist you on Dragonstone for a while, my lord. When Renly stood at the door of the hall and lamented that he seemed a little poor, the former acting Lord Andrew Estamond said beside him, "After this, I will go to King's Landing to report on my work." The acting Lord is a temporary substitute for the Lord to manage the territory. Now that Renly, the real Lord, has returned, he naturally has no reason to stay. At the same time, he was appointed by the king and was not Renly's subordinate. The Estamond family was actually a nobleman under the jurisdiction of the Stormlands. During this period, you'd better promote a steward, Andrew suggested. He will manage the personnel dispatch and property status in the castle for you. Renly nodded when he heard this. Needless to say, he could think of all this. After all, he couldn't waste his time on managing various trivial matters, but the specific candidate still needed to be considered. The main reason was that he had previously focused on some intelligence personnel, and he had never thought about this steward. Or, he didn't care about this territory at all. Obviously, Andrew also found that Renly seemed to have no preparation, so he began to carefully remind him of all the matters that needed to be paid attention to in managing the territory. However, his words did not last long before he was interrupted because the Dragonstone scholar Cans, who was said to have gone out to see a doctor, hurried back. Then Renly suddenly realized that the kind-looking man who came in front of him was not a simple person. "Thank you for the 500 reward from the book friend Lineage." Chapter 220 Great Inventor. In the high, deep, and empty hall, the grey-haired old man in a grey bachelor's robe spoke softly, sounding like a kind grandfather, making people relax unconsciously. The climate on the island has always been humid, and now it is summer. The body fluids of people will become very viscous, so illnesses often last for a long time, and there are more possibilities of mutations. This is mainly due to the excess of body fluids in some places. As we all know, excess or insufficient body fluids will cause the birth of diseases, so when I treat Frick, the main method is to make adjustments to this, and after my few days. These professional knowledge words made Andrew, the former acting city lord standing under the lord's chair, feel quite profound, but he also admired the knowledge of this bachelor of Cans very much. However, what he said was all lies to Renly. The unique gift of psychic moment allows him to feel the various emotions emitted by the other party when communicating with people face to face, or when someone talks to him specifically. This feeling is not too clear, and he can only vaguely distinguish some general ones: anger, sadness, sincerity, or falsehood. At this moment, Renly felt that the kind-looking and slightly hunchbacked old man in front of him was actually lying. The medical knowledge he said about this era could not be a lie, so where was he lying? It was easy for Renly to guess that he did not go to treat the so-called Frick, but went to do other things. At the same time, when the Mr. Cans introduced himself, Renly also felt this kind of falsehood, so he initially judged that this old Mr. who had been communicating with him for nearly 10 years was actually not simple. Thinking about it, Renly, who seemed to be listening quietly while sitting on the Stone Lord's chair, suddenly asked, "Are the Meesters proficient in medicine?" "When I was studying in Old Town, I specialized in medicine." Mr. Keynes answered like this, but seemed to be afraid that Renly would misunderstand, so he added, "I also have some knowledge of metallurgy and mysticism, and I'm also proficient in raven studies, but my best skill is still medicine." I heard that Meesters can use the method of holding wrists to judge whether a person is sick. Renly asked with pretended curiosity, "Is this true?" By feeling the rhythm of the pulse, some abnormal conditions in the human body can be found, but that requires very advanced knowledge of music theory, and I don't know much about this. Mr. Keynes answered like this, and Renly said that he wanted to experience it, so the kind-looking old Meester stepped forward without any defense and held his wrist. But then, he was grabbed by Renly's arm in reverse. "My lord, what are you doing?" Mr. Kans was quite surprised, or he could not imagine that Renly could find out his lies. However, Renly did not mean to explain at this time. Instead, he changed his previous kindness and pinched the old man's skinny arm, revealing a sneer on his face. Old Town has a very formal process for the allocation of Meesters, and it will also be recorded in King's Landing. I don't doubt that Mr. Kans really exists, but I guess his existence is a thing of the past, right? This suddenly sounded a bit inexplicable. At least Andrew, the third person in the hall, did not understand what Renly said at all, but the person involved changed his face because of this. What do you mean by this, Duke? Renly did not answer his question, but turned his eyes to the middle-aged man not far away. Andrew, go down first. I want to talk to Mr. Cance alone. The former acting Lord of Dragonstone was quite curious about this, but he nodded after hearing what Renly said, and then stepped out of the hall. So Renly and the old Meester whose arm he grabbed were left here. Did you kill him? Renly asked afterwards. What are you talking about? Before you take office on Dragonstone? Please let go of my hand, my lord. You are too strong. If there is anything we can do, we can. Why did you do that? Excuse me, my lord, were you exiled? The repeated questions were spoken in a rapid pace, and it was obviously irrelevant. However, when Renly's last sentence fell, the old man who had been able to keep his calm face trembled all over, and then stared at Renly with horror. He wanted to speak between his lips, but he trembled, and didn't say a single word. You were exiled from the Citadel, you killed the real Mr. Cance, you came to Dragonstone in his place, you. Looking at the kind-looking old man in front of him, Renly was also quite surprised. Judging from his appearance alone, no one could imagine that this person with such a kind temperament and appearance could be so cruel, but the feedback from the psychic moment clearly told Renly that all this was true. If it was just a distance perception, Renly could only feel a stream of hazy emotions, but when he could touch the target, Renly could actively transmit his thoughts into the other person's body, and then connect with the other person's mind. In this state, he could not only feel all the other person's feelings, but also read the thoughts that emerged in the other person's mind. He used this method when he interrogated the red-robed monk at Hornhill, and it was the same now. This method was obviously very terrifying. At least the old man who should have a strong psychological quality was frightened like a little girl who saw a ghost. His skinny body couldn't stop shaking continuously, and his face was pale and terrified. Your purpose is just to replace him. Why were you exiled? Because of studying dead bodies? What's your name? Qyburn. Qyburn. As if he couldn't bear it anymore, the old man in the grey wool robe screamed and struggled violently. Seeing this, Renly's wrist loosened, so he staggered back involuntarily, and finally fell on the black stone steps below with a plop. Qyburn? Renly was a little surprised. Yes, Qyburn. The old man who rolled down the stairs stared at him in horror, completely ignoring the severe pain caused by the fall. My name is Qyburn. Yes, my name is Qyburn, not Cans. Not Cans. Don't say it anymore. What did you use? Magic? It's magic? The first half of his sentence was full of tremors, but the second half seemed to suddenly stabilize his mind, and his face showed a hint of fanaticism. It's magic? You used magic? Renly, who was sitting upright on the Lord's chair, did not answer his question, but stared at the old man who collapsed on the ground not far away, feeling like he had suddenly won a prize. At first, he thought that this person might be a disguised existence like the faceless man, so he used a trick to hold him tightly, and then a series of forced questions made him realize that this person was an imposter. However, at the end of the questioning, he suddenly asked such a name. Qyburn? Renly's impression of the drama in his previous life was generally vague, but he really couldn't forget this name. It was because in the final confrontation between the two sides in the drama, this old man named Qyburn was a cheat for one of the two sides. Think about it carefully. What exactly is this person? The hand of the king, the head of intelligence, the necromancer, the great scientist. He can not only make plans to stabilize the country, but also invent and study to make dragon-slaying weapons. He is loyal and hardworking, and has no personal feelings. He is simply an all-rounder. In other words, this person is the best talent in the Seven Kingdoms. Originally, Renly was quite hostile to this pretender, but now he suddenly felt that, if it was really Qyburn, then this. You said you are only proficient in medicine? He suddenly found something wrong. Are you using magic? The old man ignored his question, and crawled over to ask impatiently. Answer my question first. That's right. I have delved deeper into medical skills. Then what about armament manufacturing? Arms manufacturing? The old man was stunned when he heard this, and then his face was full of confusion. Chapter 221 Lord's Daily Life. This old man named Qyburn did not understand the manufacture and development of arms, and he did not even touch upon the military knowledge that many maesters had studied. Renly was disappointed to find that, apart from his medical skills and some knowledge about corpses derived from them, he was very ordinary in other aspects. Obviously, this was a low-profile Qyburn, not omniscient. However, even if it was a low-profile version, Renly believed that he was not comparable to ordinary maesters, so even though the other party had a criminal record, he did not choose to expel or hang him, but after a long secret talk, let the old maester continue to serve in Dragonstone. Referring to the unreliable memories of the previous life, this person's character can be said to be loyal, but many facts have proved that this is not exactly the world of that drama, so this cannot be guaranteed, but Renly is not afraid that he will cause any trouble. Without him, with the characteristics of the moment of psychic communication, he does not have to worry about the loyalty of his subordinates at all. Renly's purpose of returning to Dragonstone was to stop here and then go to King's Landing, and he didn't have many plans for his own territory, to understand what the Lord needed to do, and to arrange the affairs of the territory properly. These were his only two goals. So after resolving the episode of Mr. Qyburn, he began to do his business. "My lord, this is my ship. Sam and Rad can testify for me. Please don't believe his false accusation." The voice of a fat old man complaining was heard in the magnificent hall, and after he finished speaking, another hunchbacked old man with grey hair beside him couldn't help but get angry. "There's a big scratch on the bottom of your boat, but mine doesn't. Caesar, don't think I don't understand this. You secretly replaced my boat with yours. Did you think I couldn't see it? Which normal person would look at the bottom of someone else's boat?" The man who spoke first shouted, "It's okay if your own boat has a scratch. So you came to my lord and falsely accused me of replacing your boat, just because you wanted my good boat. You, Caesar, you're a shameless old thing. You still say I'm shameless? It's obviously you." Then, under the interested gaze of Renly, who was sitting in the lord's chair, the two old men started to quarrel with each other, and started to fight about their parents. Soldiers were watching closely on both sides of the hall to prevent accidents, but they did not move without the Duke's order. After watching for a while, Andrew, who was beside Renly, saw that Renly had no intention of stopping them, and could not help but remind them in a low voice, "My lord, you should stop them." Renly coughed dryly, then waved his hand to signal the soldiers to separate them, and said at the same time, "Both of you have not provided any evidence except for verbal accusations. It is difficult for me to judge this matter, so either you solve it privately, or you can produce other evidence." After he finished speaking, he signaled the soldiers to take them away without waiting for the two old men who looked embarrassed to answer. Renly could tell who was lying, but he did not feel that anyone was lying at this time. The two men seemed to think that they were the victims and their words were true. However, this kind of thing could not be alright, so the truth of the matter was very simple. One of the two was old and confused and mistook the other's ship for his own ship. Renly could guess which old fool it was, but he didn't want to waste time with the old fool, so he sent them away and then received the next group. "My lord, my son Kara and Giselle, the daughter of Bors, are getting married, so I came to ask for your opinion." An old fisherman with a hunchback in the hall nodded and bowed. "We also brought taxes to pay. Look." This as he spoke, he handed the two chickens and a few strings of salted fish in his hands to a soldier with both hands. His familiar posture seemed to have done this kind of thing many times. Taxes in this era are not limited to monetary taxes, but also in-kind taxes, or in-kind taxes are the norm for most farmers to pay taxes, so chickens and fish are normal. Renly said that he had no objection to this, and said a blessing, so the old fisherman who was secretly worried about the character of the new lord was completely relieved, and then looked happy. "If you are free, Master Renly, we invite you to attend the wedding, which will be held in 4 days, at the small square. If you are free." Renly nodded at him, then glanced at him. The young man behind him lowered his head timidly, and did not dare to look at him, but the girl next to him raised her head, and flirted with Renly with a slightly blushing face, which seemed to be very brave. A medieval version of an honest man. Renly looked back at the young man and sighed secretly. After that, he received a fisherman who came to pay taxes because his elders died, a drunkard who complained that a tavern at the dock served stinky food to guests, and a farmer who hoped to reclaim new land in Dragon Mountain, which is a piece of land behind the volcano. Dragonstone is a small place, and the things that are repeated over and over are not big, but they are very tedious, which makes Renly feel as if he has turned into a neighborhood committee aunt. However, he had expected this. In fact, when he was in Highgarden, Renly often saw Lord Tyrell dealing with such trivial matters. This is the norm in this feudal world. However, the Lord's time is not completely wasted on these boring things, or their focus is actually to deal with the affairs between their vassals, family hatred, conflicts of interest, family marriages, approval or denial of vassal requests, etc. Renly's direct vassal is only 4 in total, and he has not been back for a long time, so there is nothing for him, the Duke, to solve at present. But in the next 2 days, these 4 vassals still came to Dragonstone to visit one after another. The 4 are Earl Ballemon of the Point, Earl Sandris of Wonderful Harbour, Earl Valerian of Tidehead, and Earl Celtiger of Crab Island. Dragonstone is separated from the Red Castle of King's Landing by a bay called Blackwater Bay, and the area where Dragonstone is located is the exit of this Blackwater Bay. The territories of his lords are also around this exit, and they are not far from each other. So when Renly, the Duke of Dragonstone, returns, it is natural for them not to come to pay a visit. Lord Ballemon of the Pointed Horn was a frail, obese middle-aged man who spoke in a hollow voice. Lord Sandris of the Wonder Harbour was a pious good-natured man who could not stop talking about the gods. Lord Valerian of Tidehead was a handsome middle-aged man with a reserved and proud personality. The most interesting one was Lord Celtiger of Crab Island. The old man limped over to visit, holding his buttocks, and put on a pitiful look, but never mentioned the previous incident. A dinner party held in the castle gave Renly a basic understanding of the personalities and conditions of his vassals. Generally speaking, each of them had their own thoughts, but there were no major problems. And they did not stay for long. After living in Dragonstone for one night, they said goodbye and left. Renly was therefore busy with the tedious affairs of the Lord again. This job seemed rather boring to him, and there were no twists and turns. However, 7 days after he arrived at Dragonstone, he suddenly received a special visitor. The visitor was Meaga Targaryen, who he had previously sent to Crabclaw Peninsula. She claimed to have brought back a very important investigation result. My friend is getting married. There are only 2 chapters today. Chapter 222 Unexpected News. The disciples are fleeing overseas through the Crabclaw Peninsula? A surprised question rang out in the empty hall, followed by another steady female voice. Yes, they are gathering secretly from all over the 7 kingdoms to the Crabclaw Peninsula, and the lords there not only provide protection, but also contact ships to smuggle them out of Westeros. Renly, sitting in the lord's chair, narrowed his eyes when he heard this. The words from the silver-haired man wearing a black cloak at the bottom of the stairs were completely unexpected to him, but he could tell that the words were true. At least the other party thought it was true. This was an unexpected gain. After arriving at Dragonstone, Renly no longer paid attention to any abnormalities in the Crabclaw Peninsula. After all, he learned that the habit of killing tax collectors there had existed for a long time, not suddenly. As for the guy in front of him who had been instructed by him to go to the Crabclaw Peninsula, Renly even threw him out of his mind, thinking that this person would obviously make a wasted trip and would not find any results from the investigation. The current situation is the opposite of the speculation. Although it sounded true, Renly still found some loopholes. The shipping around the Crabclaw Peninsula is active. If the people of the peninsula really smuggled people out on a large scale, how could they not be discovered? It's not a large scale, but it's transported in batches. After hearing this, the silver-haired Meaga said without any pause, a trading ship from Pentus arrives at Gulltown every once in a while, and those trading merchant ships can pass by the Crabclaw Peninsula and pick up the smugglers there to return. As long as they are careful, they will not be noticeable. Renly frowned when he heard this. Pentus is one of the 9 free trade cities across the sea from King's Landing, and Gulltown is a large trading city on the north bank of the Crabclaw Peninsula, located on the edge of the valley, and is also one of the 5 major cities in Westeros. The other 4 are King's Landing, Old Town in the Reach, White Harbor in the north, and Lannister Port in the west. Gulltown and Pentos are not far apart, so there must be a lot of trade, and the route between them does pass by the Crabclaw Peninsula, so if there is such a cover, it is indeed hidden. However, if this is true, then it means that Pentos, one of the 9 free trade cities, has also joined the Targaryen side? Thinking about this in his heart, Renly asked, "How did you get this news?" "We have our own way," Meager replied, but after thinking about it, he seemed to feel that this was not enough to show his sincerity, so he added, "The people of Crabclaw Peninsula are very xenophobic, but we also have their people among us, who know all the customs and geography of the peninsula. It is not difficult to disguise and sneak in to get information in a short time." Renly couldn't help but smile when he heard it. "It seems that there are really many talents among you." "Of course," Meager replied proudly, "we are not many in number, but all of us have real skills." "Not many." Renly thought for a while and asked, "As far as I know, people like you don't appear in a fixed place, but all over the 7 kingdoms. So how did you gather people together? You are not the only one with unique skills." Meager smiled mysteriously when he heard it. "I have my own way." Renly narrowed his eyes. Compared to 9 years ago, this woman is much smarter and more stable. I think she has suffered a lot, and the people behind her. What do you think of standing here? He suddenly straightened up with a dignified look and looked down at the silver-haired man standing at the bottom of the steps. "This island, this castle, and the chair under my butt were all yours once." Meager pursed his lips when he heard it and then said to him lightly, "I used to be standing up, but now I'm used to squatting." The conversation in the hall lasted for a long time, and that night, several ravens suddenly flapped their wings from the top of the crow's nest tower in the castle, and flew in all directions, and then landed in the hands of several vassals under Renly. After receiving the letter, Earl Sandras of Wonder Harbor did not hesitate to gather ships and soldiers, to prepare to snipe smugglers in the waters of Crabclaw Peninsula. Earl Ballemon of Pointed Horn looked at his only son, coughed and ordered his subordinates to do the same. Lord Valerian of Tidehead frowned at this, but he still responded to the call, but he was slow in recruiting soldiers and preparing ships. Lord Celtiger of Crab Island was overjoyed by the letter, and said happily to his round-faced son, who was serving beside him, "I told you that running and crying would always work, and now it works. But why didn't that guy express his opinion at the time?" The round-faced young man was quite surprised. After reading the content of the letter, he guessed our plan. "What do you mean by that guy? You should call him Lord Duke and speak respectfully." The old earl's face straightened when he heard the words, and he said seriously, "Duke Renly guessed our plan and said it in public, which was a warning. After saying it, he still planned to intervene in this matter, which was taking care of him. Do you understand? So what that person meant was, it means that, if you assist him honestly, everything will be fine, but if you try to be clever, you will get nothing." After saying this, the old Lord Celtiger was full of emotion. "When I first met the Duke in King's Landing 10 years ago, I felt that he was extraordinary. Now it seems that I was right. So is the content of this letter true or false?" "Of course it can't be false." The old man heard this and said, "If you want to ask the Iron Throne to send troops, fake news is impossible. But the Duke is investigating while exposing you, and the meaning is very clear, so we must actively respond. Merchant ships are not comparable to warships used in war. Although Renly's vassals are not many, because they are in the ocean, each family has several warships. Under normal circumstances, these ships are more than enough to surround 1 or 2 sneaky merchant ships. However, as if worried about insecurity, Renly sent letters not only to several earls under his command, but also to the Grayson family in the Vale. The Grayson family has a huge influence in the Vale. It rules the port city of Gulltown, which is not far from Dragonstone. There is only a Crabclaw Peninsula extending from the land into the ocean, like a crab claw. However, compared to the barren Dragonstone, the trading city of Gulltown, which is backed by the resources of the entire valley, is not only rich but also powerful. Therefore, even though the current Lord of Dragonstone has a special status, the young Earl Grafson did not take it seriously. Instead, he sneered after receiving the letter. "Cooperate with Dragonstone to encircle our business partners in Pentos? Do you think I'm his vassal? How dare you order them? The performance of the Duke of Dragonstone in the Reach is enough to prove that he is very smart, sir. Maybe we can give him a good deal on this matter. The steward of the Grafson family beside him also saw the content of the letter and made a suggestion. What if he is smart? His territory is too small and there is no possibility of inheriting the Iron Throne. We don't need to pay such a price to please him. Earl Grafson replied, secretly thinking about something else, but after hesitating for a moment, he still gave up the idea. We are only responsible for watching the show. He said to the steward. Thank you Suzuanzovo for the 1000 yuan reward, thank you 92 for the 500 yuan reward, and thank you Xianatang 246 for the 100 yuan reward. Chapter 223 Second letter. The sea was shrouded in darkness. Looking out, the hazy continent in the distance seemed like a huge monster lurking under the dark ocean, with only its head exposed. It was silent, but there was a deep sense of terror. The cold wind blew on the thin linen shirt, bringing a burst of coolness. Standing on the bow of the deck of the Lady of Fortune, Captain Turner, who had a forked beard, was secretly a little anxious. As a captain under the command of a certain governor of Pentus, Captain Turner had another mission when he returned from Seagull Town this time, which was to arrive at the sea area called Crabclaw Peninsula and wait for someone to come on board. This mission had certain risks because there were many ships traveling in the nearby waters. If he was discovered, not to mention the danger to his life, there would be many troubles, so Captain Turner was very cautious about it. However, no one knew what was going on. The agreed time had passed, but there was still no boat in sight. Captain Turner could not help but pace back and forth on the deck, cursing those mysterious stowaways in his heart. That's right, Captain Turner knew who he was going to smuggle. In fact, this was not the first time he had done this kind of smuggling. At the same time, relying on his good connections in Seagull Town, he also understood why those people were so embarrassed. The whole of Westeros was looking for them. This involved a power struggle among the upper class in Westeros. Turner was not interested in it, but he was also paying attention to it because this struggle would directly affect their business dealings. At the same time, he had always wondered why they, Pentus, were involved in this struggle. Relying on the advantage of being the closest to King's Landing, Pentus is very rich, but it is not strong among the 9 major trading cities. Many years ago, Pentus fought many battles with Bravos, another free trading city, over slavery. As a result, they were defeated one after another and had to sign a peace agreement, which stipulated that the Pentus people could not own more than 20 warships, hire mercenaries, sign contracts with free mercenary groups, or retain any troops beyond the city guards. In this case, it is what the Pentus people should do to get along with both sides, rather than rushing out to fight against a behemoth. Maybe it's the threat of those damn Bravos? He guessed so. In the years since the signing of the agreement, Pentus has been subject to Bravos, a good neighbor that is not very close. If Bravos really puts pressure on the governors, Captain Turner didn't think about it anymore, because in his sight, several small boats swaying on the dark sea suddenly appeared, and the direction of the boats was exactly where the Crabclaw Peninsula was. He breathed a sigh of relief, and then began to ask the people on the ship to prepare and return immediately after the stowaways came up. Things went smoothly at the beginning. More than a dozen stowaways who were wearing ordinary clothes, but talking in mysterious words boarded the ship without any surprise. However, just as the sails of the merchant ship were raised and expanded to set sail, Captain Turner suddenly found that more than a dozen huge warships were faintly emerging in the sea around his ship. In the dim environment, Captain Turner could not see the sails of these warships, but from their surrounding posture, it was obvious that they were not friendly. His face changed drastically, but he did not signal the ship to escape. Instead, he hurriedly grabbed a confidant sailor and whispered, "Hide those people before, let them wear crew clothes, go." The sailor nodded hurriedly, and Captain Turner took a deep breath and waited silently. His merchant ship was not as fast or as capable as a warship. If he moved rashly, he would be completely exposed. It would be better to disguise it. Maybe he could get away with it. Unfortunately, his plan did not succeed because the ships surrounded them without any negotiation and directly took control of Captain Turner's luck lady, and regardless of their excuses, They decisively detained all of them, including the pretenders who had boarded the ship before. What happened in the waters off the Crabclaw Peninsula was very secretive, but it was not long before a letter sent from Dragonstone to the Red Keep in King's Landing completely exposed the matter. When the letter arrived, Grand Maester Purcell, who was in charge of sending and receiving letters, was playing with his favorite pet dog in the room. He couldn't help shivering after hearing the raven's ugly cawing, and then hurriedly ran to check. Then a strange look flashed across his rosy and healthy cheeks. The incident at the riverbend has just ended, and they are already planning to attack the Vale. This Lord Renly. Muttering to himself, the Grand Maester couldn't help but think of the annoying little boy 10 years ago. He couldn't help but sigh and sigh, then took the letter and walked quickly to the outside of the Maester's tower, ready to hand it to the king. King Robert had no intention of visiting the brothels outside the Red Keep recently, so Grand Maester Purcell easily learned where the king was from the servants and met him in a garden. Another letter from my brother? Although King Robert was fat, his voice was loud. After hearing this, a bald old man sitting opposite him couldn't help but look at the letter that the Grand Maester handed to the king, secretly guessing what was inside. A letter from the riverbend a while ago excited the members of the Royal Council and made the entire Red Castle talk about the Duke of Dragonstone who had disappeared for many years. Now that the discussion has not completely stopped, a second letter has arrived. Maybe it's another good news? The bold old man, the Duke of the Vale and the Prime Minister Jon Arryn, silently expected. If it were before, he would not care about the letter sent by a young guy who had just reached adulthood, but the previous incident in the riverbend was really well done, so it was difficult for him to ignore the young Duke of Dragonstone, or he had already paid enough attention to him. However, the bold old man suddenly found that King Robert, who was silently reading the letter, suddenly looked up and glanced at him, and his expression seemed a little strange, which made the old Duke shudder. Bad news? He asked hurriedly. Read it yourself, Jon. The Fat King said as he handed the letter over. The bold old man reached out to take it and hurriedly looked down, and the solemn expression on his face gradually turned into a weird one. The letter contained a lot of content, which can be roughly divided into two parts. One part was about the people of Crabclaw Peninsula and Pentos ships protecting the smuggled disciples, and the other part was a sharp accusation. Lord Renly claimed in the letter that after he discovered the smuggling incident on Crabclaw Peninsula, he had invited Earl Grafson of Gulltown to act together, but Earl Grafson refused to send troops, so he seriously suspected that Earl Grafson and his family were in collusion with Pentos, the smuggler, or in other words, they were in collusion with the Targaryen remnants behind Pentos. He pointed out that during the uprising, War of the Usurper, Gulltown was the gathering place of the royalists in the Vale, and the Grafson family of Gulltown was also the leader of the royalists. Although they have surrendered now, they are still unwilling to give up, and there is a high possibility that they want to collude with Targaryen to cooperate with them from inside and outside. What do you think of this, Jon? Seeing the change in the expression on the bald old man's face, King Robert asked seriously. I killed Marco Grafson who stood on the side of Targaryen with my own hands. Maybe his nephew has a grudge against me? He asked this without hesitation, because if this was the case, it would mean that the Grafson family also betrayed Jon Arryn, the Duke of the Vale. Just like when they rose up in the Vale to resist Targaryen, the former Earl of Gulltown raised troops to support Targaryen, and openly stood on the opposite side of Jon Arryn, the feudal lord. Without evidence, it is impossible to distinguish between true and false. The bold old man replied after hearing this. Didn't Renly say in the letter that he captured the merchant ship from Pentos? This can only prove that Pentos is in collusion with the people of Crabclaw Peninsula and Targaryen, and it can't even prove it completely, because those disciples can't completely represent Targaryen. The old man said, after looking at the letter in his hand with complicated eyes. He said to Robert opposite, but perhaps we can summon Earl Grafson to King's Landing in person for questioning. I had a headache from drinking wedding wine yesterday, and I'm not in a good condition. I'll resume updating tomorrow. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224 Pagans. I'm not the Lord of Gulltown, nor his king, so even if he refuses my request to send troops, it is reasonable, provided that I did not write that letter. While King's Landing was discussing Renly's letter, the parties involved in Dragonstone were also discussing it. There was no solid evidence for everything before the troops were sent out, but now that I have captured that ship, it is equivalent to directly confirming the contents of the letter. Walking in the bright garden behind the Dragontail gate of Dragonstone Castle, Renly said to the people around him, if King's Landing is smart, they will definitely use that letter to make a fuss. At least, they will definitely let the Lord of Gulltown go to King's Landing. Do you think the Lord of Gulltown has ulterior motives? Silver-haired Meager asked with his head tilted. Not long ago, she witnessed the person next to her writing the letter with her own eyes, and now Renly explained it to her in person again. He did not say it clearly, but he also showed a sincere attitude, or a cooperative attitude. I'm not sure, Renly replied, but Gulltown was the place where the royalists in the Vale started their uprising during my brother's rebellion. If I were Targaryen, I would have secretly communicated with Lord Graveson of Gulltown, just like they did with some families in the Reach. So he might have ulterior motives, and this possibility would make him afraid to go after receiving the summons from King's Landing, and in that case his suspicion would be infinitely magnified. After a pause, Renly added, and if he dares to leave his castle and go to King's Landing, then I will personally contact him, and I can also determine what the situation is. Renly's attitude was very cautious, because Gulltown was indeed a very critical point in the Vale, but he was a little impulsive. Mika, who was beside him, had only been in contact with him for a short time, and was once in the enemy camp. It seemed very casual to speak out his own plan so bluntly. At least, Mika, the person involved, was a little surprised by this. After all, the other party had acted as if he didn't care much about her and the people behind her before, so why was he so open now? Aren't you afraid that I will tell others about this? She couldn't help asking. Haven't we reached a cooperation intention? Renly replied with a smile. You also said that you would not stand on the side of Targaryen. Do you trust me so much? Why not? Renly said with a serious face. Although we were enemies in the past, that was more than 10 years ago, and you have changed a lot now than before, and you can convince others. At least after the investigation, I believe what you said, so there is no need to hide some things. He thought that, even if you tell others, you can't change anything. With the ability of telepathy, even if others know about this and are prepared, they can't defend against his mind reading. Meager didn't know Renly's true background, but she didn't really believe Renly's lies, or she instinctively thought that Renly might have other purposes for telling her these things. In fact, Renly did have other ideas. I said before that I would consider introducing you to my brother after you proved your sincerity, he said, but now I'm going to regret it. While speaking, he paid close attention to the expression of the silver-haired woman. Noticing that her face did not change at all, he could not help but sigh secretly, and then said bluntly, I want you to stay and help me. Like this time? Meager asked. Yes, just like this time. Renly said, we are not sure what the specific situation is, but there may be many reasons why the Targaryens were able to reach cooperation with several free trade cities. I think the fundamental problem is very clear, that is you people and the so-called old gate behind you. Meager frowned when he heard this, but Renly did not finish his words. The so-called disciples are composed of many priests of gods, and the several major churches behind them have a strong influence in the free trade cities. So in a sense, they can represent the free trade cities, and the purpose of the disciples is to find the door. We don't know what the door is, but at least we can see that those disciples have mobilized a lot of manpower and financial resources for the so-called door, but their progress has been very slow, or even there may not be any. Do you know what the reason is? Westeros is too big. It's inconvenient to find it. That's one aspect. Renly, the door in question, said calmly. The other aspect is the obstruction of the church. Church? Meager couldn't help frowning when she heard this. She was naturally hostile to the church, and this was naturally the result of old conflicts. You mean, the people of the church obstructed the disciples from doing things in Westeros? That's right. Renly nodded. The church obstructed the disciples, interfered with the disciples, and even expelled the disciples, so the disciples made slow progress and never made much progress because of faith. Of course. Renly replied. If I were the church, seeing so many pagans running to our territory in a blatant manner to find the so-called door, and then frequently contacting our own believers, would I believe their lies? Meager pursed his lips when he heard this. Although they were in a hostile relationship with those disciples, most of their hostility was to avoid those people, and they didn't carefully understand the specific living conditions of the disciples in Westeros. The church today is different from the church in your time. It doesn't have that much power. Renly ignored the other party's expression and said to himself, the church has no armed forces and cannot completely expel the pagans, but they can influence local lords to exclude them, and they can also call on believers to be hostile to them. So, for the disciples, if they want to find a door in Westeros without any obstacles, the church is a hurdle that they cannot overcome. So they are going to support a new regime to suppress the church. Meager frowned and asked, isn't this too impulsive? Maybe they are confident that they can overthrow the existing regime in Westeros, or maybe they have been searching for more than 10 years, but to no avail, and they are hostile to the church everywhere, so they are impatient. Renly replied, maybe there is something else we don't know, but the facts have proved that they have reached a cooperation with the Targaryens. In that case, they might as well cooperate with you Baratheons, which is much simpler. What capital do they have to cooperate with us? Renly asked back. Baratheon is now a royal family. What benefits can cooperation with them bring to Baratheon? It can even be said that there will be no benefits, only disadvantages. The Church of the Seven is deeply rooted in Westeros. Cooperating with those people is equivalent to standing on the opposite side of the church, and in a sense, the church represents the wishes of most people. At this point, Renly suddenly thought of the story of Melisandre, the red-robed woman, and the queen, which made him frown, but did not affect the continuation of his words. So they found Targaryen, and Targaryen also needed their help, so the two sides hit it off. Meager nodded silently after hearing this, and then looked at Renly suspiciously. Why are you telling me all this? Of course it's cooperation. Renly smiled when he heard this. The Church of the Seven has no armed forces, but the Church of the Seven has a profound influence on the entire continent. Even most Westeros people believe in the Seven Gods. Under normal circumstances, the Church of the Seven Gods will not interfere in the change of power in the Seven Kingdoms. It doesn't matter to them who is the king. But how do you think the church leaders will react when they realize what I just said? The next chapter will be a little later, maybe more than half an hour. Chapter 225 Situation Plan Unexpected. The conversation in the garden of Dragonstone Castle lasted for a long time. Finally, at dusk, the silver-haired man hurriedly said goodbye and left, ready to implement Renly's plan. Watching the other parties back as he left, Renly squinted unconsciously. Driven by the common enemy, he persuaded the other party to do this for him without much effort, but in fact, he didn't need to do it in his original idea. Renly believed that, even if there was no such thing as finding a door, the cooperation between the pagans and Targaryen was enough to arouse the church's suspicion. However, Renly found that they had exposed the cooperation between the disciples and Targaryen for several months, and there was no response from the church. In other words, the Archbishop of the church did not respond. Renly did not think that the church would make concessions on this issue of faith. He believed that there were two reasons for the lack of response. First, unlike the church in its heyday, which had armed forces and could call on believers across the continent to resist the tyrant Meager with just a piece of paper, the organizational structure of the Church of the Seven Gods is now too loose, like a disintegrating behemoth. Second, the current archbishop of the church is a fool. This made him think more about the deal that had not yet been reached with the Seven Gods, but the most important thing at this time was not to think about the deal, but how to make the church aware of the problem and then mobilize it. A behemoth is a behemoth after all. Although it has no power itself, its influence is comparable to that of an invincible army. Civilians, knights, nobles, except for Dorne in the north. Basically everyone in Westeros believes in the Seven Gods. So if the church is really dragged out to call on everyone to be hostile to Targaryen and the pagan disciples, then even if many lords in Westeros have different intentions, they must consider the consequences of this choice. Some lords and nobles may not pay much attention to faith, but most ordinary people are very pious. So for an ordinary farmer, is his own lord more important, or is faith more important? This question needs to be verified, but when it really comes to that time, the lords themselves cannot help but think about it. Therefore, Renly believes that the cooperation between Targaryen and those pagans is a failure. In other words, the moment they started to cooperate, they naturally stood on the opposite side of the people of Westeros. Renly didn't know why Targaryen made this choice. Maybe he had no choice, or he was short-sighted, or he felt that this kind of thing was not a big problem. But no matter what Targaryen thought, when he found out about their cooperation, Renly naturally couldn't help but take advantage of it. Originally, his idea was to wait and see. He thought that the church would definitely be aware of the existence of this religious invasion without him doing anything. But at the moment, he seemed to have overestimated those people in the church. Thousands of years have passed since the last time the Seven Gods Church launched a war of faith. The battle between the ancient seven gods and the old gods has long become a long-standing ancient history that has been written down and ignored. The invincible situation for countless years has made the church seem a little slow to react. So Renly thought it was necessary to remind them. But he didn't want to go down in person or negotiate with the church through Baratheon, because that would seem a bit deliberate, and the church might seize the opportunity to get involved with the royal family. So he hoped to achieve this through Meager in front of him and the team behind him. The solution is not difficult, just ask them to publicize this matter everywhere, and then let the church realize this problem. To resist foreign aggression, you must first stabilize the country. This is one of his ways to stabilize the country, but Renly did not put all his hopes on it, because this kind of thing is still a bit illusory. Before it is really achieved, no one knows what the specific effect will be, so in addition to this, he has other plans. Targeting the Vale and the Riverlands. The overthrow of the Targaryens and the creation of the Baratheon dynasty benefited from the alliance of the four families of fish, wolf, eagle and deer, but this alliance is not that solid. In other words, the dukes who have formed an alliance with the Baratheons may not have a strong control over their vassals. Take the Tully family in the Riverlands for example. There are many troublemakers in the Riverlands, and many lords do not take the Tully family seriously. Although the Duke and the King have formed an alliance, the Duke's vassals are not puppets who follow what the Lord says. They have their own ideas and interests, and they are not fools who follow what the Lord says. Renly believes that the Riverlands is the most chaotic place, and he should also pay special attention to the lords there. Secondly, in this alliance of fish, wolf, eagle and deer, the second most unstable is the Vale. There is no other reason. Jon Arryn, the Duke of the Vale who strongly supports King Robert, is already very old. He may die suddenly one day. That's fine. The only heir of the Duke of the Vale is a sickly kid. He may die earlier than Jon Arryn. This is a very serious problem. Even though the Arryn family of Silvermoon Eagle is deeply rooted in the Vale and has a far-reaching influence, when the crisis of heirs arises, the Lords of the Vale will inevitably have all kinds of small thoughts. At the same time, the Duke of the Vale after Jon Arryn may not always stand on the side of Baratheon. That's why Renly will look at the Vale after the Riverbend. In addition, the Deer family, that is, Renly's family, does not have so many complicated situations. The Lords of the Stormland do not like their new King Stannis very much, but they love King Robert very much. At the same time, they are also the direct line, so there will be basically no chaos. Renly also thinks that the Wolf family in the north, that is, the Stark family, is relatively stable. The current Duke Stark is in his prime, and already has 2 legitimate sons and 2 daughters. It is said that Lady Stark is pregnant again, and may give birth to a son. There is no problem of heirs. In terms of family prestige, the Starks are much stronger than the Tully family in the Riverlands. The Tully family in the Riverlands has only been in power for 300 years, and the Starks claim to have a history of 9,000 years. It is not known whether it is true or not, but at least the Starks have ruled the North for no less than 1,000 years. With such a long time, they have already infiltrated the idea that the Starks are the leaders of the North into every corner of the North. So even though the Starks' direct territories and conscripted soldiers may not be very strong, their prestige among the Northerners cannot be replaced by anyone, and their rule is also very stable. So as long as the Starks don't commit suicide, they will be fine. The problems within the Alliance are roughly like this. As for the other areas of the 7 kingdoms outside the Alliance, Renly thinks that the Reach is relatively safe. After all, he has personally met with all the major lords of the Reach, and has a clear control over that area. He believes that apart from anything else, the Reach will not have any trouble in the battle between Targaryen and Baratheon. Not to mention the Westerlands. The Lannister family has a very strong control over the Westerlands, and Lannister was the #1 executioner who captured King's Landing and slaughtered Targaryen. Not to mention that the next generation of kings of the Baratheon dynasty are related to them by blood. Even if this did not happen, Lannister would not have gone to the Targaryen side. In a sense, Lannister is the most solid ally of Baratheon. The most serious problem is in Dorne. The Church of the Seven has little influence in Dorne, and Dorne was married to Targaryen in the past, and the royal family members slaughtered by Lannister included the Dorne princess and her 2 children. This has basically pushed Dorne to the opposite side of Baratheon. If there were no Targaryen, Dorne might not have so many troubles, but now Targaryen has already shown signs of a comeback, so it is impossible for that side to continue to be honest. Renly believes that the reason why it is so quiet there is very simple. The exiled Targaryen is not ready for a real counterattack yet. They can only choose to remain dormant, but when the day comes, when Targaryen is ready, Dorne will definitely respond first. Of course, all this is still his speculation at present. Maybe Dorne will really be a Baratheon minister, but this possibility is very small. So during this period, in addition to studying the Vale and the Riverlands, he also focused on thinking about how to solve the problem of Dorne before the war breaks out. Renly has not thought of a solution for the time being. After all, the Dornish are notoriously difficult to deal with, but he is not in a hurry about this matter. After all, it is useless to be anxious about such things. At the same time, he does not put too much thought on Dorne, the destined enemy. For the time being, his main concern is still how the Earl of Gulltown in the Vale will react, and how to stimulate the church. However, Renly has no intention of thinking about Dorne, but Dorne has set its sights on him. Just as the Earl of Gulltown was summoned and set out on the road to King's Landing, Renly, who was in Dragonstone, received a letter from King's Landing. The Martell family that ruled Dorne wanted to reach a marriage with Renly, and King Robert summoned Renly to King's Landing to discuss this matter. There is another chapter in the evening. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.